When a noble brat with a nice back view hired me as a training dummy, she assumed I would be nothing more than a punching bag because I was a commoner. I pulled off a gojo move and asked how much strength I should show to be useful to her. She thought I was joking and told me to go all out. As the match began, she fired a low-rank spell that I easily dodged. I pulled off another gojo move and asked if that was her next attack. She responded by launching a bunch of magic arrows, but I destroyed them with a simple basic spell. Realizing I was not an ordinary commoner, she became serious and fired a barrage of flaming arrows at me. This time, I casually raised a magic shield, causing a small explosion. Being the brat with the nice back view that she was, she used the smoke as cover and tried to sneak in a desperate attack. It did not go well for her. Moving back to the beginning, I spent my entire life in Ebelstein, where I met a lying old geezer. He could use one-star magic and never missed a chance to brag about it. He also completely lost his mind whenever kids pranked him. He was the one who taught me the basics of magic and started me on my journey as a mage. There was no grand reason behind it. The geezer needed support, and I needed magical knowledge. The seasons passed in the blink of an eye, and he guided me through them. One day, I filled my body with mana. The disbelief on his face was impossible to miss. As I opened my eyes, I released a burst of magical energy that formed an arrow and shot into a nearby tree. That was how I spent my first year beside the geezer, doing all the work just to become a one-star mage. One night, while drunk, he told me that beyond the walls, some nobles reached 3 stars before even coming of age. He said a commoner like me could never compare and warned me not to get cocky. According to him, I would hit a wall the moment I reached 2 stars. The geezer was always ranting about bloodlines. He never stopped talking about the gap between nobles and commoners. Sometimes I wondered if it was an inferiority complex. That night felt unusually long. When I arrived the next day, I found his corpse covered in bruises. It looked like he had been beaten to death. I knew he was the type to pick fights, but I later learned the truth. He had been caught stealing a 2-star spellbook from a warehouse and was beaten by the guards. No one understood why a geezer who was already 1 foot in the grave would do something like that. Then a system panel appeared before me. It asked me to choose my primary school of magic. I was not originally from this world. Just like that, 4 years passed. That was when I met Katia Flameheart. She was the former mistress of a fallen noble house and a 3-star mage sought after by every guild. While staying in town, she accepted contracts through the Beldun Mercenary Corps and taught me magic. I learned a lot from her. Most of those lessons began at a tavern called Beldun's Tier. During one of our lessons at Beldun's Tier, Katia told me that every mage naturally develops the desire to climb higher. She said that I had the talent to do exactly that. At the same time, she warned me that excessive greed would only slow my growth. I told her I would remember that. After the lecture, she instructed me to close my eyes and focus on my mana. She told me to calmly sense where it was being generated, understand its flow, and imagine using it to bring my thoughts into reality. I followed her instructions. A blue wave of mana soon spread around my body. She was convinced that I possessed an unusually large amount of innate mana. She also noticed how stable it was, and believed it came from all the practical experience I had gained over the years. Just as I opened my eyes, a loud explosion echoed in the distance. The entire tavern erupted into chaos. Mercenaries rushed outside demanding to know what had happened. Some thought we were under attack. Before I could react, Katia grabbed my hand and told me to stay quiet and follow her. She led me to a secluded location and told me to listen carefully. Katia reminded me that nobles were extremely protective of their privileges, and among those privileges, magic stood at the very top. She explained that people often viewed natural talent as a blessing, but that belief mostly applied to nobles. She then told me that it was incredibly rare for a commoner to reach 3 stars. Every commoner who had managed such a feat had dedicated their entire life to magic. Then she lowered her voice. She explained that what I had just cast was a 2-star delusion-type spell known as auditory hallucination. Without realizing it, I had become a 2-star mage at the age of 14. After that, Katia continued traveling with me and passed down many different spells. She also taught me about the noble society she once belonged to and the customs of the upper class. Before I knew it, another year had passed. Then, Katia left. The county of Alv had appointed her as a private tutor. House Alvi was one of the most influential noble families around. Even the Grand Duke of the capital treated them with respect, because Count Alvidar stood behind them. For Katia, it was an opportunity she simply could not turn down. Becoming the magic instructor of a noble from such a prestigious family was considered a great honor. Before leaving, she gave me a 2-star spellbook as a farewell gift. Looking at my status screen, I had already collected a decent number of spells. A year later, through constant study and practice, I had improved enough to completely master 2 additional 2-star spells. By this point, I was already 16 years old. but I had no intention of stopping there. One day, I visited the Mercenaries Tavern, where Jaden, the leader of the Beldon Mercenary Corps, told me they had finally landed a proper request. I asked what kind of request it was. He told me it came from House Duplain of the Grand Duchy. Even I was surprised by that. I asked why a family of that status would hire mercenaries like us. Jaden immediately scolded me and said the reason did not matter as long as we got paid. According to him, the Duplins had so much money they could spend it like water. He also pointed out that working with them could open doors for future connections. I then asked what exactly the job involved. Jaden explained that it was nothing extraordinary. We only needed to eliminate a few monsters near the outskirts of the Grand Duke's territory. That answer only made me more suspicious. A family as powerful as House Duplain should not need a small mercenary corps to deal with a few monsters. The moment I heard that, I got up and headed for the door. I told Jaden I was not interested in the contract. He immediately yelled for me to stop. I told him to find someone else, since he already knew I did not take shady jobs. Jaden sighed and said he would have preferred to handle it himself, but the client specifically needed a mage. Mages were becoming increasingly rare among mercenary groups, and I was the only one available. That did not convince me. I pointed out that needing a mage to kill a few monsters sounded even more suspicious. Then Jaden tossed a gold coin at me as an advance payment. I suddenly found myself willing to hear the rest of the proposal. Money has a strange way of improving my judgment. Not long afterward, 3 people arrived. One of them wore a hood that completely hid her face. Jaden introduced them as the clients, but the elderly man among them immediately objected. He looked at me and declared that I was just a child. He told Jaden he expected someone far more impressive. Jaden defended me and insisted that I was the best mage he knew. The old man still refused. Just as he was about to leave, the hooded woman quietly whispered something to him. Whatever she said worked. The old man immediately changed his mind. Soon after, we headed to the plains to begin the hunt. The mission itself was simple. A group of goblins appeared, and I dealt with them without much effort. Using both magic and physical ability, I tore through them so quickly that they barely had time to react. Before long, the goblins were nothing more than a pile of corpses. Afterward, the dispatch officer praised me for clearing so many monsters in such a short amount of time. Once the mission was finished, I returned to the tavern. The moment I stepped inside, Pauline started yelling at me. She accused me of becoming a noble's lapdog. Hylan reminded me that no matter what happened, we were never supposed to bow to trash nobles. Jaden calmly pointed out that the job paid extremely well. That immediately caught her attention. She demanded to know how much I had been paid. The moment she heard I received 1 gold coin, her entire attitude changed. She started shouting that she wanted in on the next job because she could also crawl under a noble's legs if the pay was that good. Jaden yelled back and told her to shut up. He also pointed out that crawling under a noble's legs was not actually part of the job. Eventually, Pyline drank herself unconscious. Once the tavern became quiet again, Jaden asked me how the request had gone. I told him it was nothing special. All I had done was kill a few goblins, and before I knew it, the mission was already over. Jaden admitted that the clients gave off a terrible first impression, but he could not deny that they had plenty of money. I agreed with that much. Still, something about the whole thing felt wrong. I was convinced they were hiding something. I told Jaden that the dispatch officer claimed he was searching for 3 specific qualities: youth, stamina, and social skills. The problem was that I barely qualified for any of them. I also pointed out that the woman who introduced herself as a kitchen maid had hands that were far too clean for someone supposedly doing rough work every day. I was about to list a few more suspicious details when Jaden cut me off. He reminded me that we were mercenaries, not investigators. Our job was simple: accept the request, complete it, collect the payment, and leave. I could not argue with that. The world was a harsh place, and earning a living mattered more than satisfying my curiosity. The next day, I helped clear out another group of goblins. Once the work was finished, Jaden eagerly approached the clients to collect our payment. When he received 2 gold coins, he nearly lost his mind from excitement. I could not even blame him. Then the dispatch officer approached me. He said he valued my abilities and wanted to entrust me with another request. He asked if I was interested. Both Jaden and I were confused. The old man decided to skip the formalities and immediately got to the important part. The reward would be 15 gold coins. The moment I heard that number, I accepted before even asking what the job was. In my defense, 15 gold coins was a very convincing argument. Not long after, we traveled to the Duplain estate. Jaden was completely overwhelmed by the size and grandeur of the place. Before entering the estate, the old man stopped us. He said it was time for proper introductions. He revealed that his name was Dawn, and that he served as the Grand Steward of Duke Duplain's household. He apologized for hiding his identity, and explained that the nature of his duties required discretion. The woman then introduced herself as Katerina. As it turned out, she was not a kitchen maid at all. She was the head maid of the estate. Jaden was so shocked that he immediately bowed and hurriedly introduced himself. None of this surprised me very much. I had already suspected they were hiding their true positions. More importantly, it confirmed confirmed that the hooded woman traveling with them was someone of considerable status. A moment later, she removed her cape. For the first time, I saw her face clearly. With a bright smile, she introduced herself as Aline Eleanor Duplain. Then she revealed the reason I had been brought there. She wanted to hire me as a magic tutor for her younger sister, Della. For a moment, I was completely speechless. A commoner being hired to teach a noble lady was not something that happened every day. While I was trying to process that information, a heated discussion was taking place elsewhere in the estate. Inside his office, Duke Duplain was meeting with his eldest son, Valerian. Their conversation was interrupted when another son, Reg, stormed into the room. The Duke immediately told him to compose himself. Reg fired back that Della was the one who needed that advice. He complained that she had gone too far and had even started beating servants he personally hired. Valerian urged his brother to lower his voice and reminded him that their father was in the middle of an important meeting. Reg ignored him. He told the Duke that 10 servants had already quit during the past month because of Della's behavior. According to him, she constantly broke things whenever she felt like it. He then directly asked his father how much longer he intended to ignore the situation. Valerian finally lost his patience and ordered Reg to leave. Reg refused. Instead, he argued that it was time to let Della go since the family already had Aline. The Duke immediately replied that such a decision was not Reg's to make. Reg continued anyway. He mentioned that Dawn had already investigated a monastery where Della could be sent. In his opinion, it would be better for her to dedicate herself to religious service rather than remain a burden on the family. The moment those words left his mouth, he crossed a line. The Duke stood up and slammed Reg's head against the table. He reminded his son once again that Della's future was not his decision to make. Even then, Reg refused to back down. Despite his father's anger, he insisted that a decision regarding Della would eventually have to be made. At the same time, Aline and I were making our way deeper into the main castle. As we walked, she asked whether I had heard anything about Della. I told her that I had seen Della's name in the Duplain family registry. Aline lowered her head. Her expression became noticeably gloomy. She quietly explained that Della was not well known to the public. As we continued through the castle, we ran into Valerian and Reg. Valerian greeted Aline and asked how her time in Ebelstein had been. Aline politely replied that she had been living comfortably, thanks to his support. Valerian nodded and suggested they catch up later since he needed to tend to Reg's injuries. Not long after, Aline and I entered Duke Duplain's office. Aline greeted her father, and he mentioned that he had already heard about her accomplishments in Ebelstein. With a smile, she gave him all the credit. She then introduced me as the magic tutor she had brought from Ebelstein, explaining that I would be responsible for teaching Della. After the introduction, Aline excused herself, saying she did not want to interrupt her father's work. I was about to leave with her when Duke Duplain asked me to remain behind. Once Aline was gone, the Duke studied me for a moment. He admitted that he was surprised I was still so young. Then he asked whether I could use magic to any reasonable extent. I modestly replied that I knew a little one-star magic. The Duke removed his glasses and became noticeably more serious. He told me that there was no need to lie, because humility was not always a virtue. The moment he said that, I understood exactly what was happening. I was standing in front of a 5-star mage. Someone at that level could see through a weak attempt at downplaying my abilities. I immediately apologized in case I had come across as disrespectful. The Duke waved it off and said he understood why I acted that way. He then pointed out that, judging by my appearance and age, I did not exactly look like someone suited to be a magic tutor. I told him the truth. I was a mercenary. The Duke simply nodded. He said he would not pry into my affairs since Aline had personally selected me. Because of that, he was willing to trust her judgment. He informed me that I would be granted access to the annex where Della lived. Afterward, he said a maid would escort me there. Just as he was about to dismiss me, I stopped him. I told him there was something I wanted to ask. The Duke gave me permission to speak. I reminded him that I was a mercenary. I explained that I had been hired to help Della learn magic and prepare her for noble society. The Duke asked why I was stating something so obvious. I replied that I had a request regarding that matter. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the estate, Della was making life miserable for her maid. She threw whatever she could get her hands on while the poor girl repeatedly apologized. Della eventually screamed at the maid to get out. She even threatened to ruin the girl's face if she ever entered her room again. At the same time, Jaden was having a conversation with Aline. He asked why she had chosen me. According to him, countless magic tutors would gladly fight for the opportunity to teach a member of the Duplain family. He also pointed out that I would have a difficult time guiding Della, since I was a commoner and she was a noble. Aline then revealed that she had already tried hiring renowned magic instructors from all over the continent. every single one of them had eventually given up. That was why she changed her approach. She admitted that I was a mercenary, but she believed I understood noble customs and culture surprisingly well. Jaden then explained why. He revealed that one of my teachers had been a fallen noble who was once quite accomplished. According to him, I had learned many things from that person. Aline finally understood why I appeared refined and polite despite my background. She believed I might be able to gently guide Della and help her change. Jaden, however, could not help laughing. He told Aline that she needed to get better at reading people. According to him, I was a mage who grew up on the streets and had been working as a mercenary before even reaching adulthood. Then he asked her a simple question. Did she really think someone raised in those conditions could survive on refinement and kindness alone? Not long afterward, a maid escorted me toward the annex. When we arrived at Della's room, I knocked on the door. After receiving no response, I stepped inside anyway. Then I introduced myself and offered my greetings to the noble lady I was supposed to teach. Della was sitting on the opposite side of the room when I entered. She told me to come closer. I did as instructed, but the closer I got, the more suspicious her smile became. The moment I stepped within reach, she dumped a bucket of foul-smelling water over my head. Then she mocked me by calling me a sewer rat. Not satisfied with that, she climbed onto her chair so she could literally look down on me. She grabbed another bucket and poured even more stinking water over me, proudly explaining that she had prepared it beforehand. Throughout the entire performance, I remained silent. Eventually, she ran out of water. Seeing that I had not reacted the way she wanted, Della became irritated. She kicked me in the chest, knocking me backward. Then she took off one of her shoes and threw it at me. After returning to her seat, she reminded me that I was nothing more than a sewer rat and should know my place. Before coming to Della's room, I had already spoken with Duke Duplain. I told him that Della's problems would not be easy to solve. That was when I asked whether he was willing to give me full authority over her education. Then I slapped her. The sound echoed throughout the room. For a moment, Della simply stood there in shock. The reaction reminded me of a conversation I had with Katya 3 years earlier. While traveling together, I had asked her what she would do if she had to teach a student who rejected kindness. She told me she would try to understand them, embrace them, and guide them with patience. I replied that her approach sounded too idealistic. Then I asked what she would do if the student wanted none of that. Katya smiled and explained that the purpose of teaching was to lead someone toward a better path. If understanding and acceptance failed, then a teacher simply needed a different starting point. When I asked what she meant, she gave me a very simple answer. She said I should make sure the student feared ignoring me. Back in the present, I looked at Della and told her that people deserve consideration and respect. Then, I told her to get back up because I disliked repeating myself. Furious, she rose to her feet and slapped me across the cheek. She demanded to know how a low-born commoner dared to lay a hand on her. Before she could finish her rant, I slapped her again. Then I informed her that I also disliked making people repeat themselves. To my surprise, Della suddenly smiled. Apparently, she thought she had finally trapped me. She immediately began screaming for Dawn. According to her, I had assaulted her. Within moments, Dawn and several maids rushed into the room. They hurried to Della's side and asked whether she was all right. Dawn then turned toward me and demanded an explanation. He asked what I thought I was doing by striking a member of the Duplain family. He also warned me that there would be serious consequences if the Duke learned about this. Without saying a word, I pulled out a written document. It was a letter personally signed by Duke Duplain. The document granted me full authority over Della's education and allowed me to handle it however I deemed necessary. After reading the letter, Dawn's expression immediately changed. The Duke's signature was unmistakable. There was nothing he could do. News of the incident spread quickly. When Valerian heard what happened, he stormed toward my room in a rage. The moment he arrived, he grabbed me and looked ready to throw a punch. Before he could do anything, Reg stepped in and stopped him. He told Valerian that starting a fight would solve nothing, and that they should discuss the matter like civilized people. I calmly explained that everything I had done was authorized by Duke Duplain himself. Reg backed me up and reminded Valerian that I was Aline's guest. Attacking me would create problems for the entire family. More importantly, their father had already approved my methods. Valerian told me to follow him and instructed Reg to stay behind. As I walked out of the room, Reg quietly spoke to me. He said he had already heard what happened and, in his opinion, Della desperately needed someone to knock some sense into her. Then he patted me on the shoulder and assured me that I had nothing to worry about because Valerian would not do anything extreme. Still, I could tell that Reg was frustrated. Deep down, he was unhappy that Valerian continued protecting their sister despite everything that had happened. A few minutes later, Valerian led me into a room that had once belonged to Della before she was moved to the annex. Paintings covered nearly every wall. Valerian looked around the room before explaining that Della used to love drawing. According to him, she would constantly ask him to look at her artwork. Whenever he praised her, She would blush so much that her face turned completely red. As I examined the paintings, I noticed something unusual. None of them were truly finished. Valerian explained that Della often left blank spaces and only drew the parts she found interesting. After a moment of silence, he apologized for how he had acted earlier. I told him it was not a problem. Then, I asked why he had brought me there. Valerian looked around the room again before giving his answer. He wanted me to understand that Della was not a child who deserved to be hated or beaten. According to him, she had not always been this way. At some point, she became obsessed with bloodlines and noble status. That obsession gradually changed her. Eventually, she was removed from the main house and confined to the annex. Valerian admitted that he did not understand why she had turned out like this. However, he was determined to stop her from being sent to the monastery. He explained that if Della could learn even one-star magic, he believed he could convince their father to let her remain with the family. Then, with complete sincerity, he asked me to save her. As I looked through the books scattered around the room, I noticed something interesting. I pointed out that Della had filled the margins with notes and observations. That told me she had not completely abandoned magic. I also noticed that the books on the far shelves were theory texts from the School of Regulations. Valerian confirmed my observation. He explained that most nobles studied through the School of Regulations. After examining everything more carefully, I told him I would do my best. Later that night, Della was peacefully asleep in her bed. Then I showed up with a bucket of water. A moment later, she was no longer asleep. I told her to get on her feet. Della stared at me as if I'd completely lost my mind. Ignoring her complaints, I grabbed her by the wrist and told her to come with me. Della was still trying to process what was happening while I dragged her through the hallways. The maids watched in complete disbelief. Some looked shocked. Others looked entertained. Not a single one volunteered to stop me. I continued dragging Della through the estate and eventually out into the woods. Once we were deep among the trees, I finally let go and threw her onto the ground. Della immediately jumped to her feet. She demanded to know whether I'd gone insane. Then she shouted and asked who I thought I was to teach her anything. I looked at her and gave an answer she never expected. I told her that I had no particular interest in teaching her magic. According to me, the real reason I accepted the job was because I enjoyed bullying arrogant nobles. The moment those words left my mouth, Della froze. She stared at me as if she had misheard something. I continued by telling Della that being a tutor was merely a convenient excuse. As far as I was concerned, the job was really about putting arrogant nobles in their place. Della still looked convinced that I was joking. That belief lasted right up until I drew my sword. I casually remarked that hearing nobles scream was surprisingly satisfying. At that point, Della finally stopped treating the situation like a prank. She nervously asked whether I thought I would be safe after doing something like this. I assured her that I would be perfectly fine. After all, she was already on the verge of being sent to a monastery. Even if she complained, few people would take her seriously. I also pointed out that if things somehow went wrong, I could always apologize with my life. A commoner's life was not considered particularly valuable anyway. Then I gave her a grin that probably did not help the situation. I mentioned that running away was also an option. Considering how much trouble she caused the family, they might even thank me for removing a headache before eventually forgetting I existed. That was the moment reality finally hit her. For the first time, Della genuinely believed she might die. Without another word, she turned and ran. She quickly realized that heading back toward the estate would be pointless because I would catch her almost immediately. Instead, she sprinted deeper into the forest. Apparently, she knew the woods well and hoped to lose me among the trees before circling back to safety. Judging by the determination on her face, she was already imagining my execution. Unfortunately for her, I had other plans. A fireball had formed in my hand. The sight alone left her stunned. Fireball was a 2-star spell. The question written all over her face was obvious. How could a mercenary use 2-star magic? Before she could think about it any further, I launched the spell. I deliberately missed. The fireball exploded nearby with a thunderous blast. The shockwave shook the area and scared the life out of her. When she turned around, she found me smiling. Apparently, that smile was even more frightening than the explosion. Della scrambled back to her feet and continued running. A few moments later, she tripped and crashed into the ground. Before she could recover, ice arrows began flying past her. Each one missed by inches. One arrow struck the earth directly in front of her face. The message was clear. If I wanted to hit her, I could. I called out and complimented her speed. Honestly, it was impressive. For someone who spent most of her time locked away, Della ignored me and kept running. However, exhaustion was beginning to catch up to her. The longer she ran, the more obvious it became that escape was impossible. Meanwhile, I slowed down and examined my surroundings. Something about the forest felt familiar. Then it clicked. This was the same forest I had seen in Della's paintings. Della had been wandering these woods since childhood. Without realizing it, she had been sensing the mana flowing through the forest and expressing those feelings through her artwork. I was still putting together the details when movement flashed behind me. Della had doubled back. She charged at me with a stone raised over her head, intending to smash it into my skull. I reacted instantly. Using the flat of my sword, hard. I knocked the stone from her hand. The rock flew away, and Della collapsed onto the ground. I looked down at her and admitted that her determination was admirable. Most people in her situation would have continued running. She understood that escape was impossible, so she chose to fight back instead. That took courage. I told her that making such a decision could not have been easy. She was exhausted. She no longer had the strength to run. With my sword lowered toward her, I asked whether she had any final words. Even then, Della's pride refused to break. She lifted her head and declared that she had no intention of apologizing. According to her, nobles did not grovel before commoners. I asked Della why she was so obsessed with bloodlines. For the first time, her answer came without arrogance. She told me that if her bloodline was taken away, she would have nothing left. Then, she slammed her fist into the ground. Tears filled her eyes as she asked whether I thought she had never tried to learn magic. According to her, she had tried countless times. No matter how hard she worked, nothing ever happened. Della explained that once magic and painting were taken away, there was nothing left she could call her own. The only thing she still possessed was her noble bloodline. If that disappeared too, she genuinely believed she would become worthless. After listening to everything she had to say, I let out a long sigh. Then I drew my sword. I told her I had heard enough. I declared that this was the end. Then, I swung my blade. Della shut her eyes. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. Slowly, she opened her eyes. To her surprise, an ice barrier had formed around her. My sword had stopped the moment it touched the barrier. The most shocking part was not the barrier itself. It was where the mana came from. The mana creating the ice was flowing directly from Della's body. She stared at it in disbelief. Meanwhile, I calmly put my sword away. Then I bowed. I congratulated her on a job well done and apologized for my earlier rudeness. At this point, Della looked more confused than relieved. I explained that what she had just done might not qualify as proper magic yet. Technically, it was only a manifestation of mana. However, that did not change the important part. She had done it. Then she screamed. After everything she had been through, frustration, relief, confusion, and disbelief all came crashing down at once. Once she finally finished crying, I started treating the injuries she had picked up while running through the forest. As I wrapped her injured leg, I explained something important. I told her that she belonged to the School of the Wild. I explained that most nobles were taught through the School of Regulations. That was the traditional path favored by noble families. However, every school of magic ultimately led to the same destination. Then I explained her problem. She had been trying to learn magic through the methods of the School of Regulations, despite naturally belonging to the School of the Wild. That approach was doomed from the beginning. Della then asked how I knew she belonged to the School of the Wild. I explained that she could naturally sense mana flowing through nature and unconsciously transferred those sensations onto the canvas. That was why her paintings felt so alive. Mages with the temperament of the School of the Wild often began sensing the mana and nature from a very young age. Most of them did not even realize they were doing it. After finishing the bandages around her legs, I stood up. I told her she should be able to walk now. Then I reminded her of one final thing. Manifesting mana for the first time was an important step. I told Della that starting the next day, I would teach her how to manifest mana naturally. To my surprise, she actually thanked me. Afterward, I suggested we return to the estate. On the way back, I asked her about the sunset painting hanging in her old room. I told her it was beautifully done. Della looked slightly embarrassed and admitted that it was her masterpiece. She also revealed that I was the first person to learn that the painting was actually finished. The following morning, Della woke up and immediately tried to manifest mana again. Nothing happened. She tried several more times. Still nothing. Frustrated, she climbed out of bed and headed for the door. The moment she stepped outside, she collided with a maid carrying water. The maid accidentally spilled the entire bucket onto her. As soon as the maid realized what she had done, all the color drained from her face. She dropped to her knees and began desperately apologizing. To everyone's surprise, Della simply told the maid to watch where she was going. Then she walked away. The maid stood frozen in disbelief. Soon, several other maids rushed over and asked whether she was hurt. The maid explained that Della had only told her to be careful before leaving. The entire group was stunned. Meanwhile, I was still asleep. Then someone began pounding on my door. Apparently, Della had decided that sleep was no longer a human right. Dawn heard the commotion and attempted to calm her down, reminding her to behave like a noble lady. A few moments later, I opened the door. Half asleep, I asked what she wanted. Della immediately demanded that I teach her how to control the mana she had manifested. The moment Don heard that she had manifested mana, he froze in shock. Personally, I was more concerned about being awake. Instead of teaching her, I closed the door and told her to come back in the afternoon. Then I returned to bed. Della was not pleased. She spent quite a while banging on my door and demanding that I open it. I ignored all of it. A proper sleep schedule was important. Much later, Reg happened to overhear the maids discussing the recent changes in Della. The conversation quickly spread throughout the estate. Before long, Valyrian informed Duke de Plain that Della had manifested mana. The news came from the head butler, making it difficult to dismiss as a rumor. The Duke was visibly relieved. Reg, however, remained cautious. He argued that everyone was celebrating too early. Manifesting mana was certainly important, but it did not erase everything Della had done up to that point. Valerian immediately became annoyed. He could not understand why Reg continued acting indifferent when Della had finally achieved something meaningful. Reg replied that a single success was not enough to completely ignore the family's original plan of sending her to a convent. The discussion ended there, but it was clear that neither brother had changed his position. That afternoon, I finally decided it was time to begin Della's lesson. When I found her, she was sitting alone with a gloomy expression. I casually remarked that she looked like she was sulking. Della immediately denied it. According to her, she was not sulking. She was angry. Naturally, I continued teasing her. I pointed out that changing the name of the mood did not actually change the mood itself. The more I spoke, the more irritated she became. Eventually, she could not take it anymore. She jumped to her feet and loudly declared that she was, in fact, the moment Della saw my expression, she immediately straightened up. Apparently, some lessons left a lasting impression. I sat down and explained that just because she could manifest mana did not mean she was ready to use it recklessly. If she pushed herself too hard, it would only backfire. I told her I knew that from experience. Learning was important, but resting was just as important. Since she had already rested enough, it was time to study. Della made a disgusted face and called me a boring, stuffy magic teacher. With a serious expression, I asked whether she wanted me to teach her in a less stuffy way. The moment those words left my mouth, she remembered everything that happened in the forest. Not wanting a repeat of that experience, she immediately corrected her attitude. I informed her that today's lesson would focus on mana manifestation. Once she could freely manifest mana whenever she wanted, learning one-star magic would become much easier. I also explained that the School of the Wild had no rigid structure, making it ideal for self-study. Unlike the School of Regulations, it valued freedom and personal understanding. I told her that she was actually very well suited to the School of the Wild. Della looked confused and asked what I meant. I explained that her free-spirited personality had excellent compatibility with that school of magic. On top of that, she carried the blood of the Duplain family. Whether she liked hearing it or not, she was overflowing with talent. Della's face instantly turned red. She looked genuinely shocked that I was praising her. I confirmed that I was being serious. After all, she had created an ice barrier instinctively under extreme pressure. That alone was proof of remarkable talent. Eventually, she reached a conclusion. I immediately corrected her. Having talent and being a genius were not necessarily the same thing. Della disagreed. According to her, they were exactly the same. Elsewhere, Reg happened to witness some of our interactions. Far from being pleased, he looked increasingly irritated by the progress Della was making. The following morning, Della burst into my room before I was fully awake. She proudly announced that she could now manifest mana on command. The only problem was that she could not control its direction properly. Over the following days, her progress accelerated. Every day she discovered something new, and every day she became excited all over again. One afternoon, I left the annex and sat beneath the tree with a book Duplain had given me. I was enjoying a rare moment of peace. Then, Della arrived. Naturally, she demanded to know whether her father had given me the book so I could avoid working. I told her yes. In fact, I was convinced that was the entire purpose of the gift. Della refused to entertain my nonsense. Instead, she grabbed me and dragged me back toward the annex so she could show off the latest thing she had learned. At a later date, I received a summons from Valerian. When I arrived at his room, he welcomed me inside and invited me to take a seat. After some brief conversation, he asked how Della had been doing lately. I told him she was making steady progress. However, mastering one-star magic would still require more time. Valerian nodded. Then he informed me that his mother had been away attending a social gathering but would be returning the following week. His tone became noticeably more serious. He warned me to be careful around her. Many nobles disliked seeing a commoner occupy an important position. Valerian asked whether I understood what he meant. I assured him that I would keep his warning in mind. Then I asked why he had called me there. Valerian stood and walked toward the window. Looking outside, he explained that he was the future head of House Duplain. Because of that, he believed his duty was to embrace and support every member of the family. To do that properly, he felt that sincerity was essential. The problem, according to him, was that people's hearts were far more complicated than they appeared. Sometimes their thoughts, desires, and values were impossible to understand. He admitted that life would be much easier if everyone shared the same beliefs and way of thinking. Unfortunately, that was not reality. By this point, I was completely confused. I finally stopped him and asked what exactly he was trying to say. Valerian finally got to the point. With a troubled expression, he admitted that Della would not spend time with him anymore. Tears started forming in his eyes as he recalled how things used to be when they were children. According to him, Della would always greet him with a bright smile back then. He wondered where that sweet little girl had gone, and whether he would ever find someone like her again. Then he walked up to me with tears still in his eyes and asked if there was some way for him to regain Della's favor. Valerian Valerian replied that the answer was obvious. I was the only person Della willingly followed around. She was already shouting my name at the top of her lungs. Before I could leave, Valerian stopped me. He pulled out a doll he had made for Della and proudly showed it to me. The problem was that the doll looked less like a gift and more like a cursed artifact. I honestly had to ask whether he was trying to bless someone or haunt them. Valerian immediately looked devastated. While trying not to cry, he admitted that he was completely hopeless when it came to things like this. Not long afterward, Della's mother returned from her journey. She approached me and complimented my work, saying she had heard many good things about me. After introducing herself, she mentioned that she wanted to send me a gift. That was when I clarified something important. I explained that I was not affiliated with any noble house. The statement immediately confused her. Then I decided to be completely direct. I told her that I was a commoner. The moment she heard that, she froze. A week earlier, Aline had thanked me for everything I had done so far. She explained that she would soon be returning to Ebelstein, which meant Della would be entirely in my care. Jaden had also stopped by to say goodbye. Naturally, he spent most of the conversation teasing me. He told me to finish the job quickly and return to Ebelstein before Pauline lost her mind after hearing what had happened. After exchanging farewells, Aline and Jaden departed in their carriage. They had already traveled some distance when Aline suddenly remembered something important. She had completely forgotten to warn me that Della's mother would be returning within the week. Jaden asked why that was something worth worrying about. What he did not know was that Della's mother was practically the embodiment of anger itself. Back in the present, Della's mother stormed straight into her husband's office. The moment she arrived, she demanded to know why a commoner had been appointed as Della's tutor. Duke Duplain immediately looked exhausted. He asked her to lower her voice. She ignored him completely. Instead, she reminded him that Della was their youngest daughter. The Duke replied that he was not particularly fond of the arrangement either. However, every qualified teacher from a respected bloodline had eventually given up on Della. There simply were not many options left. That explanation did not satisfy her. She argued that hiring a mercenary to teach a noble daughter was inappropriate. The Duke patiently explained that capable magic teachers were difficult to find. On top of that, Aline had personally recommended me. Even then, she refused to accept it. According to her, there should be a minimum standard for someone occupying such a position. Then she proposed an alternative. She suggested hiring Flom, the Duke's brother. Apparently, he had been unavailable the last time they asked, but she believed he should have more time now. The Duke stared at her in disbelief. He asked whether she was seriously suggesting pulling the man responsible for managing an entire territory away from his duties just to become a private tutor. Then he reminded her that Ebelstein was not a place that could be managed carelessly. She refused to back down. Instead, she argued that social standing mattered as well. According to her, noble society could be just as ruthless as any battlefield. She insisted that a teacher's role was not limited to education. According to her, a tutor also needed to prepare a noble for society. If Della was introduced to noble circles while being taught by a common mercenary, she feared her daughter would become a laughingstock. At that point, Valerian stepped in and urged his mother to calm down. He reminded her that she had not come to the office to fight with their father. His mother immediately told him to stay out of it. In her opinion, this was not an issue that could simply be ignored. Just then, Reg entered the conversation. He pointed out that the real question was not whether I was a commoner. The real question was whether I was qualified. Reg admitted that a commoner becoming a noble's magic tutor was unusual. However, he argued that status should not matter if the person possessed the necessary abilities. His suggestion was simple. The easiest way to judge a teacher was by examining the student's results. Before he could continue, Duke Duplain interrupted him. The Duke firmly stated that I was the real deal when it came to magic. Reg accepted that, but proposed another idea. He wanted to test Della through a magic spar. According to him, if I was truly a capable teacher, Della should have shown meaningful improvement by now. The Duke could not easily object to that argument. Satisfied, Reg left the room with a clear goal in mind. Valerian immediately chased after him. He demanded to know what Reg hoped to accomplish by challenging Della. Reg stopped and looked at his brother. Then he asked whether Valerian genuinely believed Della had changed. He reminded him of everything Della had done over the years. Valerian replied that none of that changed the fact that she was still their sister. She shared their blood. As family, they were supposed to support and protect her. Reg's expression darkened. He declared that Della was becoming bad blood. In his eyes, her actions threatened to drag down the entire Duplain family. He argued that allowing her to debut in society without changing would bring disaster upon the house. Valerian was stunned. He had never realized Reg felt that strongly. Reg simply turned away. As he walked off, he said that Della was the one who crossed the line first. That was why she remained isolated in the annex. The following morning, Della burst into my room carrying the notice for the upcoming spar. The moment she arrived, she informed me that if she lost, I would automatically be dismissed as her teacher. I told her that I was already aware of the situation. I also pointed out that Reg was an experienced one-star mage. Della stared at me in disbelief. Then she yelled. She demanded to know whether that was all I had to say despite the fact that my job was on the line. I calmly reminded her that I was a mercenary. I accepted work, completed it, collected my payment, and moved on. Then I casually informed her that I had already been paid more than enough. That answer left her completely speechless. 1 week later, the day of the spar finally arrived. The arena had been prepared, and many important members of the household were present to watch. As guests continued arriving, I welcomed Duke Duplain. The Duke seemed surprised by how calm I looked. He found himself wondering whether I was simply fearless or genuinely competent. Either way, it reinforced his belief that I was someone valuable to the family. Meanwhile, Reg stepped into the arena. His goal extended far beyond winning. He intended to completely crush Della. In his mind, she needed to confront the consequences of her past actions and regret them down to her very bones. Della had asked whether I truly did not care about her future as long as I received payment. I told her she was missing the important part. Her magical ability was improving rapidly. Even if she could not cast one-star magic immediately, she was getting closer every day. I reminded her that she possessed the blood of House Duplain. Della looked confused and asked why I was suddenly bringing that up. I reminded her of something I had already explained. The School of the Wild was built around self-discovery. That explanation only frustrated her. She demanded to know why I was talking about philosophy during such an important moment. Eventually, she calmed down. Then, for the first time, she spoke honestly. She admitted that she was far from the ideal student. Even so, she wanted to continue learning magic. More specifically, she wanted to continue learning from me. With complete sincerity, she confessed that she did not want another teacher. I looked at her for a moment before responding. I admitted that I knew almost nothing about the customs and etiquette surrounding noble magic spars. After all, I had never participated in one before. However, there was one thing I did know. I knew how to win fights. Then I asked her a simple question. Was she prepared to win? As those words sank in, Della began imagining everything that would happen if she failed. The annex, the monastery, the disappointment in her family's eyes. For the first time, the upcoming spar felt truly real. With determination burning in her eyes, she looked at me and told me to make sure she won. Back in the present, Della stepped into the arena. She was not standing there as Reg's younger sister. She was not standing there as the youngest daughter of House Duplain. She stood there as my student, and as a mage. Once both participants took their positions, Don stepped forward and explained the rules. According to him, the spar would follow the regulations used by the high-ranking mages of the Ebelstein-Kelbray Salon. The loser would be the first person to trigger General Palum's protective magic circle. After the rules were explained, Don officially declared the start of the match. As for General Palum's protective magic circle, it was an expensive magical accessory. The enchantment activated automatically whenever the wearer was about to suffer serious damage. Watching all of this, I finally got a first-hand look at how nobles fought. The match was limited to 10 minutes. Judging from Reg's posture, he had no intention of letting it last that long. The moment the duel began, he started chanting. His goal was obvious. He wanted to finish Della before she had a chance to do anything. A powerful spell flew toward her. Della immediately dodged and repositioned herself. Reg clicked his tongue in annoyance. He launched another attack, then another, and another. Della continued moving. Every time he targeted her, she changed positions before the spell could connect. From where I was standing, I could tell that her control over mana had improved tremendously. Unfortunately, when it came to actual combat experience, she was still a complete beginner. One of Reg's attacks finally cornered her. Della quickly created an ice barrier to defend herself. The sight visibly surprised him. Della was not using a proper star-ranked spell. Convinced that her barrier was nothing more than a cheap trick, he decided to smash through it with overwhelming force. Then he unleashed an even stronger attack. At that moment, Della remembered our training. I had explained that mercenaries fought differently from nobles. Victory was the only thing that mattered. I had warned her that people might criticize her if she won using unconventional methods. However, criticism meant nothing if she was the one left standing. I had asked whether she could accept that. Without hesitation, she had answered yes. Back in the arena, Della abandoned her ice barrier and ran before Reg's attack could destroy it. During our training, I had explained that many mercenaries won battles despite being weaker than their opponents. The reason was simple. They were fighting with with everything available to them. Reg continued bombarding Della with long-range attacks. Meanwhile, Della kept moving. I had taught her that controlling the battlefield was just as important as controlling magic. Mercenaries used terrain. They used every possible advantage. Most importantly, they took advantage of every moment their opponent lowered their guard. Another spell descended toward Della. She raised an ice barrier and blocked it. However, a second attack was already approaching from a different angle. Della failed to notice it. The spell struck. A massive explosion erupted across the arena. The audience gasped. Della's mother immediately panicked. Convinced that her daughter had been defeated, she demanded that the match be stopped. She even shouted at Dawn to intervene. However, Duke Duplain remained calm. He told her to sit down because the duel was not over. She stared at him in disbelief. According to her, everyone had just watched Della get hit directly. If Della had truly suffered a decisive blow, General Palum's protective magic circle would have activated. Duke Duplain also noticed something interesting during the entire exchange. While everyone else was reacting to the explosion, I had not even blinked. That alone told him everything he needed to know. I already understood exactly how much Della had grown. Meanwhile, Reg was becoming increasingly uneasy. General Palum's protective magic circle had not activated. Suddenly, he noticed a crack spreading across the platform beneath him. Before he could react, several ice spears burst out from below. He barely managed to avoid them. That was when he realized what Della was doing. She was attacking from underneath the platform. By normal standards, leaving the platform should have resulted in an immediate loss. Reg immediately looked toward Dawn, expecting him to stop the match. Dawn remained silent. The duel continued. Only then did Reg understand. The area beneath the platform was still considered part of the arena. Before he could organize his thoughts, another ice spear shot upward. He dodged again, then another attack followed, and another. The attacks kept coming relentlessly. The biggest problem was that he could not see Della. Meanwhile, Della could keep attacking until something eventually landed. For the first time, Reg truly understood what was happening. Della was fighting without a shred of noble etiquette. Then their eyes met. The moment he saw her expression, something clicked. Della looked completely calm. At that moment, Reg realized this was not Della's strategy alone. I was clearly involved. Since that was how the fight was going to be played, Reg decided to abandon convention as well. He removed his coat and prepared to fight seriously. In the audience, Della's mother was horrified. Her daughter was crawling around beneath the platform like some tunnel-dwelling monster. She immediately demanded that the match be stopped. Duke Duplain refused. No rules had been broken. As far as he was concerned, the duel would continue. Beneath the platform, Della was using her unique sensitivity to mana. She could see the flow of mana moving around her surroundings. Using that advantage, she kept launching attacks toward Reg. Forced onto the defensive, he could no longer comfortably recite long incantations. He spent most of his time jumping away from incoming attacks. Just as he was beginning to get cornered, he noticed a tall support pole standing in the middle of the platform. At that exact moment, Della lost track of his mana. She immediately realized her brother was trying something. Still, she remained confident. The next time he started casting, she intended to strike before he could finish. At the same time, Reg reached a conclusion of his own. Della could not properly track his mana from where he was standing. However, he also could not freely cast spells from his position. There was only one solution. He would change the battlefield itself. Without using an incantation, he launched a ranged attack directly at the base of the support pole. The structure snapped. The massive pole crashed onto the platform. Using the impact, Reg destroyed a large section of the arena. Then he jumped down himself. If Della wanted a fight underneath the platform, he would give her one. Through the dust and debris, he spotted her moving. An ice arrow immediately flew toward her. Della managed to block it, but the pressure was completely different now. The attacks were faster, more aggressive. For the first time, genuine fear crept into her heart. Reg had realized something important. At close range, he held the advantage. All he needed was a single clean hit. Unfortunately for him, Della had no intention of fighting fairly. Before he could react, she rushed straight at him and kicked him in the chest. The impact forced him down to one knee. As he struggled to recover, Della threw a handful of dust directly into his eyes. The attack caused immediate pain and completely ruined his vision. The moment she realized he was temporarily disabled, she abandoned the fight and climbed back to the surface. Reg quickly understood what was happening. Della was running low on mana. That was why she was desperately using every trick available. Even so, he refused to believe she could actually win. After all, this duel had been created to test whether Della was worthy. He intended to prove the difference between them. A short while later, Reg climbed back onto the arena. As soon as Della saw him emerge, Della suddenly remembered one of my lessons. I had told her to think of mana as paint. Her spellcasting was the brush. To create magic, she needed to gather the mana flowing around her and shape it into a complete image. That image would then become reality. Back then, she had been amazed while watching me demonstrate the flow of mana. Now, standing on the edge of defeat, she focused on those words. She reached out with her senses. Mana gathered at her fingertips. Following the image in her mind, she shaped it carefully. Moments later, a refined ice spear appeared before her. The spectators immediately noticed the difference. Dawn's eyes widened. Even Della's mother was stunned. What Della was displaying was unmistakable. It was one-star magic. As Della prepared her final attack, Reg decided to stop holding back as well. He gathered every bit of mana he could control and created a large formation of ice arrows. Despite Della's breakthrough, he remained confident. He was still the more experienced mage. Della launched her spear. At the same time, Reg unleashed his barrage of arrows. The attacks collided in the middle of the arena. A massive explosion erupted. The shockwave swept across the battlefield, causing gasps from the audience. Della's mother nearly jumped from her seat. For several moments, nobody could see anything through the cloud of dust. Then, the dust finally settled. A protective barrier had activated. 1 year earlier, Dawn had informed Duke Duplain that a letter regarding an upcoming social gathering had arrived. As they walked through the halls that day, the Duke had noticed Della sitting alone in her room. She had looked isolated, forgotten, almost invisible. Back in the present, the activated barrier belonged to Della. The moment she realized it, the truth hit her. She had lost. All the determination she had built up collapsed at once. Tears streamed down her face as frustration poured out of her. Meanwhile, her mother immediately began criticizing Duke Duplain. She complained that the duel had been crude and unnecessary. She blamed him for allowing such a vulgar spectacle to take place. The Duke barely listened. His attention was completely fixed on Della because he had noticed something important. When he was younger, he had been a knight who followed his king through countless battles. During those years, the king once told him that he possessed the eyes of an ambitious man. Looking at Della now, he saw that same ambition staring back at him. The maids rushed toward her and asked whether she was injured. Della said nothing. She simply continued crying. One maid attempted to guide her away so her wounds could be treated. Della slapped the hand aside. Then she started walking. She stepped down from the arena. She passed Reg, who awkwardly congratulated her on putting up a good fight. Della did not respond. The maids assumed she was heading back to her room. Instead, she kept walking. Eventually, she stopped right in front of me. Tears still streamed down her face. With a trembling voice, she admitted how frustrated she was. Then she apologized for losing. I stood up and looked at her. I told her that losing was not the end. If she felt frustrated, then she should use that frustration. She should climb higher. She should become stronger. My words broke the last bit of restraint she had left. She cried even harder. The maids watched helplessly from behind, unsure how to comfort her. A moment later, her mother arrived. Without saying anything, she pulled Della into a tight embrace. Della looked as though she wanted to speak. Her mother gently stopped her. She told her that explanations could wait. Right now, she needed treatment. After escorting Della away, the woman turned around and walked directly toward me. The warmth she had shown her daughter disappeared instantly. The moment she stopped in front of me, she exploded with anger. She called me a vulgar wretch. According to her, helping Della become a one-star mage did not make me impressive. Without hesitation, she slapped me across the face. She accused me of nothing but teaching her daughter cheap tricks. Then she grabbed my shirt and shouted that I had turned the Grand Duke's daughter into something disgraceful. Another slap followed immediately. Her voice rose even higher as she continued hurling insults, demanding that I show some dignity. Before the situation could escalate further, Duke Duplain arrived. Della's mother quickly turned to him expecting support. Instead, he stepped forward and slapped her across the face. He told her she was the one behaving disgracefully. She froze in shock. She could not believe she had been struck over a commoner. Duplain calmly agreed that I was indeed a commoner. However, he also reminded her that I was Della's teacher. He asked what kind of parent treated their child's teacher in such a manner. Then he turned to me and asked me to forgive her, explaining that everyone had their own way of expressing love for their child. I took a deep breath and told him it was fine. Duplain then instructed me to follow him to the audience room for a private discussion. As we walked away, Della's mother was left stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Once we arrived at Duplain's office, he praised my work with Della. He told me he intended to reward me properly. Then he offered me something unusual. He asked if I wanted access to the highest rank permitted to a commoner, 3-star magic. I was surprised by how directly he had asked. It felt like he already understood me better than I understood myself. As a 5-star mage and Grand Duke of the nation, he held immense authority. Without hesitation, I agreed. Before offering the reward, he acknowledged that I had guided Della well so far. However, he also stated that her current progress was still not enough to survive in high society. I replied that there were many people capable of guiding her from this point onward. Now that she had found her path, I was confident she would continue to improve quickly. Duplain disagreed. He told me that what Della needed was not just an instructor, but a true teacher. Then he looked at me and said he could sense something in me. According to him, I was carrying an ambition too large to even be spoken aloud. He said he was willing to overlook it because it came from me. I was surprised that he was speaking so openly about allowing me to rise even further, possibly beyond 3-star limits. At that moment, I realized exactly why he was dangerous. He was not afraid of what I might become. He was simply choosing to allow it. Duplain then admitted he understood I would not remain in the estate forever. He knew I had ambitions of my own. He asked whether I was already prepared to leave when the time came. I told him yes. He nodded and said he would not stop me. However, he asked me to continue teaching Della a little longer. Then he repeated his question once more, whether I wanted access to 3-star magic, the highest realm permitted to a commoner. After our discussion, I was granted access to the estate library. Inside, I found 3-star spellbooks. I was genuinely stunned. There are people who spent their entire lives searching for a single 2-star spellbook, yet I now had access to multiple 3-star volumes. At that moment, I realized I had even more reason to remain in the estate, though I also suspected Pauline would lose her mind if she ever found out. Later, I met Della again. She immediately began bragging about becoming a 1-star mage. I pointed out that she had only successfully used 1-star magic once. Still, it counted. She shouted at me, asking if I was not at least happy that my apprentice was making progress, especially since I was so focused on my book. I did not give her the response she wanted. Eventually, she backed off on her own. I did, however, acknowledge her progress. She had come a long way in a short time. That reminded me of the day she had cried after losing the spar. Della immediately tried to act tough. She claimed she had not been crying, only that dust had gotten in her eyes. She also admitted she had been worried I would be fired, and she said she wished her father had told her earlier that I was not going anywhere. At that point, I suggested we begin the day's lesson. Della was improving quickly, so it was time for her to start learning additional 1-star spells. She immediately latched onto my words. To her, it sounded like I was confirming she was a genius. I pointed out that her progress was unusual, especially for someone who had only recently learned mana manifestation. Della took full advantage of that statement. She proudly reminded me that she always followed through on what she said she would do. Then she began enthusiastically listing spells she wanted to learn. One of them was Magic Arrow, since it could be cast without a chant. While she continued planning, I cut her off. I told her she would be practicing mana manifestation again. Della froze. She had clearly expected to move directly into 1-star spells. I explained that there were many reasons for this decision, but ultimately, fundamentals mattered most. Before I could elaborate further, she suddenly agreed. She admitted she had gotten ahead of herself and assumed we would be focusing on 1-star magic. Then she noticed I was staring at her. She asked why. Teasingly, she wondered if there was something on her face. I told her no. I was simply surprised that she was listening so obediently. Della immediately responded with attitude, insisting she had always respected my instructions. I reminded her that she had once poured dirty water on me twice. Her expression collapsed instantly. She looked genuinely shocked that I still remembered. To avoid letting the mood sink further, she quickly shifted her tone and suggested we continue training. We spent the rest of the day on practice until dusk. By then, Della was completely exhausted. I took a short break and mentioned that I had heard she would soon become busy. She confirmed it. Starting the following week, she would also begin attending etiquette classes and general noble education. I told her that was a positive development. She had already reached 1-star magic, so it was time she received proper noble training. Della did not look pleased. She complained about everything she would be forced to study: basic etiquette, foreign languages, history, geography, botany, piano, even sewing. She wondered aloud how Aline had endured all of it. I was also impressed. That was exactly why Aline was called the Flower of Duplain and held such influence in Evelstein's high society. Della insisted she only wanted to study magic. I told her that was fine. After all, Duke Duplain had personally granted me considerable authority. Della, however, was not convinced. I asked her who she thought would stop me. She immediately answered, her mother. According to Della, her father might have accepted me, but her mother was not someone who would simply let things go. I asked why her mother was so determined to remove me. Della explained that her mother feared my influence. If Della learned under me, she might lose her sense of noble dignity. In her mother's eyes, she could even end up resembling a mercenary. Della pointed out that my teaching style did not resemble anything noble at all. I simply told her it was nothing complicated. She looked confused. I explained that silencing her mother was not difficult. We only needed to remove her justification for objecting. Della's mother walked through the estate with unease lingering in her thoughts, as she considered the possibility that Derek might be a harmful influence on her daughter. Her imagination escalated the concern into absurd images of Della with gold teeth, running through fields and hunting wild boars like some untamed mercenary. The thought alone made her head ache, and she wondered what exactly Derek was even offering Della in exchange for such changes. She acknowledged that her husband had accepted Derek's presence, but she still held authority as the mistress of the estate. While she was thinking of how to handle the situation, Della appeared in front of her. At first, she expected the usual reaction, Della running into her arms as she always had. But something was different. Della was dressed properly in a refined, noble outfit and greeted her with composed etiquette. She explained that she had been unable to leave the annex earlier due to her injuries and apologized for not meeting her properly. She added that she had many things she wanted to discuss, but she was already scheduled for a piano lesson that morning. Her mother stood frozen, unable to process how polished her daughter sounded. Della then calmly stated that she had to leave because her education schedule was tightly arranged. Before leaving, her mother asked if she had already begun etiquette lessons since they were supposed to start the following week. Della confirmed that she had already started. That answer left her mother even more confused since the lessons had not officially begun. After a brief exchange, Della excused herself and left. As she walked away, she even politely advised a maid not to overwork herself. Everyone watching, including her mother, was left stunned in silence, trying to understand what had changed in her. Elsewhere, Aline was speaking with her friends in the noble district of Eelstein. They mentioned that she had looked worried during the previous gathering, but now she seemed different. Aline was slightly surprised and apologized, saying she did not intend to worry anyone. She explained that most of her concerns had already been resolved, so she felt much calmer. Her red-haired friend, Alenta Belmyrd, admitted she had been worried after hearing that Aline had personally gone outside the noble districts to find a teacher. Aline thanked her for her concern and explained that it involved her younger sister, Della, who needed a proper magic tutor. Because of that, she had gone personally to find someone suitable. Alenta was surprised that Aline herself had taken such steps, assuming the teacher must be highly exceptional. Another friend, Denise Veltis, confirmed the situation and added that she had also heard updates about Della. Aline then shared that she had seen Della recently and barely recognized her. She said Della had become well-mannered and composed, almost like a different person, and had even manifested one-star magic. She admitted it made her feel like she needed to improve herself as well. Denise was surprised that Aline was openly speaking about Della, since the family had previously kept her out of public attention. Denise concluded that this transformation must have been the result of the new magic teacher. Aline agreed, stating that although he had no noble status, his ability was undeniable. That was why she had gone all the way to the Beldun mercenary corps to find him personally. Alenta was surprised again upon hearing that the teacher was a mercenary. Still, what interested her most was the fact that someone of that background had managed to transform Della from an unruly child into a composed young lady and a one-star mage. She then asked Alwine for the teacher's name, saying he would likely become well-known soon, and she simply wanted to know it before that happened. Iceline revealed that her sister's teacher was me. Back at the estate, Della and her mother were mid-conversation. Della mentioned I had been teaching her etiquette and that learning it alone had been difficult. Her mother, Yahello, responded by saying it was nice that she was studying on her own. Della wasn't letting that slide. She corrected her. It was all Derek. Dial tried again, asking what exactly had been so hard to study alone. Della told her it was difficult, but it got easier thanks to me. By this point, the woman was crashing out on the inside. Every sentence out of Della's mouth had my name in it, and her desire to get rid of me grew stronger with each one. She just needed an opening. She wasn't getting one. The servants were going around praising Della, how kind she had become, how gentle. The gardener told DL that Della had been in a remarkable mood, and that a great deal had changed in just a few weeks. Then Dawn added that Della had taken a completely different path, and that sometimes he mistook her for Iceline. He said she was finally on the verge of becoming a true lady. DL nearly lost her mind. There was no crack to squeeze through. Later, I was out practicing my magic, hitting a wall, when Reg showed up. He apologized for interrupting. I told him not to worry about it and asked what brought him out here. He said he came to talk about Della, but before he got to that, he noticed the 3-star spellbook in my hands. I told him Duplain had lent it to me. That shook him. I mentioned it was above my current level, but that studying ahead never hurt anyone. Something settled on Reg's face right then. He said he finally understood what his father meant when he called me a true mage. He left it at that and moved on. He asked about Della. His face was already red before he got a single word out. He said it was complicated, then asked if I knew what teenage girls liked. Then he asked if Della would like it if he made her a doll. I immediately thought of the doll Valerian made. I told him a doll was absolutely out of the question. Reg agreed, reluctantly, admitting he didn't think it would go over well either. He stood up, rubbed his head, and suggested we head back inside since I was done training anyway. On the way back, he told me the mood in the household had shifted. Valerian had been focused on managing the territory. Duplain hadn't said much, but Reg said he looked satisfied. I told him Duplain was hard to read. Reg said he was trying to accept something he had been avoiding, that people can change. Della had changed, and now he was ready to as well. He thanked me, sincerely. Then he brought up something that that caught me off guard. He said he noticed Della's magic was different, that it felt like drawing a picture. The moment he said that, I realized Reg was exactly what I expected from someone carrying Duplain blood. A genius. I told him Della used the mana operation of the School of the Wild. He said he had heard of it. I told Reg that everyone's relationship with mana is different. Once Della found her track, she would study on her own. She wouldn't need me anymore. At that point, if I stayed and tried to guide her further, I'd only be in the way. Reg sat with that for a moment, then said he understood, but that Della's time to shine would come regardless. I didn't argue with that. 2 months passed. Della was getting her hair done by one of the maids, picking out flowers to decorate it with. She held one up, said it smelled nice, then mentioned she was now comfortable with 1-star magic and had gotten closer to the servants. She said she had missed so much and that it was all thanks to me. The maid told her the happiness was written all over her face and asked if she was excited for her magic lesson. Della seemed surprised it was that obvious. She asked the maid to set aside one of the leftover flowers so she could give it to me. That same day, the flower fell from her hand. I told her I was leaving. There was nothing left for me to teach her. I told her that was how the principles of seasons worked. There is no eternal winter, and there is no eternal spring. I met with Duplain afterward. I told him Della belonged to the School of the Wild, which he already knew. I told him that if he continued involving himself in her growth, he would only clip her wings. Duplain heard all of it, understanding exactly what I was saying. There was no reason for me to remain in the mansion. He took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the window. He said many things had changed, that because of me, his daughter had been able to grow. He admitted he had not been a good father, too consumed with managing the territory, but that he was relieved now. He asked when I planned to leave. I told him I had heard Allen would be visiting the mansion soon, and that I intended to return to Ebelstein with her when she left. Duplain told me I would need to return the library key. I said I would return it along with the spellbooks I was still reading, and that I would hand the key to Dawn. His voice went firm. There was no need for that. He wanted the key back right then. He told me I could leave. I took it all in and bowed. I stepped out of the office and ran straight into Della. She was furious. I told her it couldn't be helped. She knew I wouldn't change my mind, but she asked anyway. Could I stay? I walked up to her and told her I was a mercenary. I was returning to that life. I had my own magic to study, and when she built up enough skill, she would come to Ebelstein for her debut. We would see each other then. If my level had risen by that point, I told her I would be more than happy to teach her something new. She told me I was so annoying that I always knew exactly what to say, which left her with nothing to say back. I took that as a compliment. That night, Della had a nightmare. She woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, then slowly registered that it was just a dream. A maid rushed in asking if she was all right. Right then, the temptation hit. She could create a scene, hit the maid, fall back into her old behavior, give me a reason to stay. She sat there and actually considered it. Then, she let it go. She told the maid everything was fine. She had already thought it through. Doing something like that wouldn't make her valuable. Not anymore. On the morning I left, Alan had the carriage ready. She told me to say my farewells. We were leaving soon. I turned around and found Della and both her brothers waiting to see me off. Valerian asked if I really had to go. I told him I had to return to where I came from. Reg said nothing, but his expression said he understood. Life in the mansion had not been easy. Valerian told me to contact him if I ever needed anything. He meant it. I turned to Della. She was clearly not ready to talk. She held out as long as she could, then gave in when she realized I wasn't going to stop looking at her. With full attitude, she asked if I thought she was going to beg me to stay. She was no longer a child. I told her it had been an honor to teach her, but I couldn't proudly call myself her teacher. I asked her to remember the magic she had learned. She told me she was going to tell everyone I was her teacher, proudly, which meant I had no chance of living quietly anymore. After all, I was the teacher of the great Della Duplain. Then, as if catching herself being too soft, she turned away and told me to take care of myself and not do anything pointlessly dangerous. I told her I would be fine. I told her not to overexert herself either. She scoffed and said she was already an adult and could take care of herself. I had said those exact words to Kadia once. Kadia had held me tightly when I left, urging me to take her words to heart. Standing there with Della, I finally understood what that felt like from the other side. I walked up to Della and patted her on the head. I told her she didn't need to become an adult so soon. She started crying. As I turned to leave, she called after me. A proper farewell this time. She said she hoped we would see each other again. I bowed and told her I would like that very much. In Ebelstein. I arrived at the commercial district of Ebelstein and walked into the tavern. Pine was in the middle of beating someone up. She stopped the moment she saw me. I smiled and told her I was back home. Jaden slid an expensive bottle of wine across to me. Something nobles drink, he said. A welcome gift. I thanked him. Klein looked me over and asked if I had always been this pale, because I looked worse after living at the Duplain estate. She wanted to know what happened there. I told her nothing serious. I just worked. She said I now talked like a noble. Jaden cut in immediately. offered her a drink to calm down, and told her to relax. She told him she was furious because she had been working alone the entire time I was gone. Jaden pointed out that I must have come back with good money. He asked if they paid well. I told him I got something more valuable than money and pulled out the spellbook. They stared. They assumed it was 2-star. I corrected them. 3-star. They lost their minds. Both of them screaming, demanding to know where I had stolen it from and telling me I was a dead man if anyone found out. I told them Duplain gave it to me. Klein went silent for a second, then grabbed me by the collar and asked if the estate was hiring an archery instructor. After the chaos settled and Klein had fallen asleep as she always did, I asked Jaden if there was any work available. He looked at me like I had just walked through the door, which I had, and asked if I was serious. I told him I was ready to start. Monster subjugation, simple requests, anything. I admitted I was worried I had lost my edge a bit. Jaden said he didn't believe that for a second. He told me mages were always in short supply in this line of work, and that if I wanted to stay busy, there was no shortage of things to do. I told him I would start the next day, and I did. Pine and I fell straight back into our rhythm, moving through monster territory back to back. No gaps, no wasted movement. We worked through several areas, clearing as we went. By night, I pushed at the 3-star wall. Every attempt ended the same way. A large explosion, hands nearly shattered, and nothing to show for it. I had a solid grip on 2-star spells. The wall to 3 was a different matter entirely. From summer through to the hard cold of winter, Pauline and I were out there taking contracts and putting down monsters. When we finally returned to the tavern, Jaden looked at us and shook his head. He said it was good to be young. Only youth could explain going back and forth across the Kent Mountains in weather like that. He added that we were probably the only two crazy enough to come back with a harpy's head in those conditions. Line exhaled slowly and said she finally knew what it felt like to be alive. Jaden told us to rest the next day. We had earned it. Then he said a request had just come in that suited my taste. Expensive, he said. Relatively easy. It had come through the Royal Mercenary Corps on West Street, from a Count Belmard. They were looking for a commoner to assist with magic sparring, which, translated plainly, meant they wanted a punching bag. Jaden said all I had to do was take a few hits and collect the coin. I told him I would take it. Elsewhere, Alente was being told by her teacher that they had already arranged a commoner for her to spar with. She was not comfortable with it. He told her it was part of her training and that the commoner had been promised sufficient compensation, so she was free to go all out. To ease her concern, he mentioned the commoner could handle 1-star magic. Alente reminded him she was nearly 2-star and that the gap between 1 and 2 was not a small step. It was the distance between heaven and earth. Then she met me. I introduced myself. The moment she heard my name, something flickered in her expression, like she had heard it before but couldn't place it. Her teacher suggested they move to the arena. Alente glanced at me and quietly wondered if someone this young could really be a mage. Inside the arena, she asked if I knew the basic etiquette of magic sparring. I said yes. She told me to resist as much as I could and promised to end things quickly, though she was already worried about what would happen if she went too far. I asked her how much resistance she actually wanted from me. She found the question irritating. I told her I needed to know the level so I could actually be useful to her. She paused, then told me I had a funny way of talking. She said to resist with everything I had. I told her I would do exactly as she commanded. In Alente's eyes, reaching 1-star at my age was impressive for a commoner, but my attitude was something else entirely. This spar was going to correct that. Remind him that between commoners and nobles, there was a line that simply did not move. She chose Shockwave, a 1-star spell. It had no visible form. To sense it, you had to read the magic the instant it was released and judge its range before it arrived. Alente felt it immediately. I told her the next attack was coming. That lit something in her chest. So the arrogance had skill behind it. Fine, but skill didn't close the gap between a commoner and a noble. She shifted to ice arrows, not the rough, half-formed kind. Hers were clean, sharp-edged, and precise. Dozens of them rose into the air and circled like they were alive. Her logic was straightforward. If I wanted to dodge, she would use volume to make dodging impossible. I flicked out a single magic arrow. Every one of her ice arrows split in two. By the time Alente processed what had happened, my arrow had already buried itself in the ground at her feet. She stood there, unable to move past it. A commoner controlling magic with that level of precision was not something she had prepared for. Her teachers saw it too. The claim of being a veteran mercenary was not empty words. 2 exchanges in, and Alente understood I could not be handled casually. She pulled back, widened the distance, and started chanting. Academy-style incantation. Her expression shifted, fully serious now. She had dropped the idea of precise takedowns. This time she chose fire, and her intention was to blow the entire platform apart. I noticed the shift. This was a different approach entirely. When her chant ended, She raised her right hand slowly. What condensed in the air this time was not dozens, it was hundreds of fire arrows. There was no way to dodge all of that. I didn't hesitate. I deployed my defenses fully and took the entire volley head on. It was a good thing I was already 2-star by then. Anything less than that round alone might have finished me. When the smoke cleared and I let the barrier drop, I caught it. A faint flicker of magic. The fire arrows had been a distraction. At that distance, I had no time to dodge and no time to raise another barrier. She really was a genius. In that fraction of a second, I pushed the output of a 1-star light burst to its absolute limit. The flash swallowed her vision entirely. Stripped of sight, she could only steady herself on instinct, telling herself to stay calm, listen for sound, find the rhythm, take it back. She heard nothing. Her vision came back just in time. Relying on the faint traces of magic in the air, she dodged my arrow again. But even as she did, I could see her wrestling with it. This boy had too much combat experience. She even began to suspect I hadn't been trying to land that last exchange at all, that I was deliberately pushing her past her limits. She was right. The moment her vision cleared, I fired 2 arrows back to back. Under that pressure, she had no choice but to throw up a defense. Just as she was gathering magic to counter, I closed the distance. That played into her hands. Rapid casting at close range was exactly where she was strongest. She told herself the moment magic appeared at my fingertips, she would strike first and end it. Nothing appeared at my fingertips. Then, lightning exploded from beneath my feet. Current manifestation, 1-star. She defended against it by the narrowest margin possible. Any slower and it would have been over. Her teacher watched from the side and said nothing out loud, but inwardly he had already reached his verdict. Wild school. And yet you can't read him at all. You really are something. Alente walked toward me slowly. The spar wasn't over, but she stopped and bowed, genuinely. With full seriousness, she thanked me for showing her something interesting. Then a glint crossed her eyes and she asked if this was how it worked. I shifted my magic flow, caught her lightning mid-cast, and redirected it. Her expression changed the instant she saw it. I had used her own magic against her. She had never seen anything like it. She already knew what was coming. Then the bell rang. 10 minutes. Time was up. Result, draw. I held back the spell I was about to release, saluted calmly, and told her she had worked hard, as if nothing had happened. We both knew it wasn't a draw. After that, her attitude toward me shifted. She told me I was an outstanding mage and that she had never seen reflexes like mine. She said that for someone who understood the noble world so well, I must have worked harder than most people could imagine to get there. I told her survival as a mercenary doesn't leave much room for choice. She told me there was no need to be modest and that she respected people who were willing to put in the work. Then she warned me that her old teacher behind her wasn't particularly fond of me, and I should probably avoid provoking him further. She said she had learned a great deal, and that next time we sparred, she hoped the result would be better. I told her with her ability, there was nothing to worry about. The half-baked opponents weren't worth her time. The one she actually wanted to defeat was someone else entirely. A face surfaced in Alente's mind. Iselin Eleanor Duplain, the one opponent she had never once beaten, no matter how many times they crossed hands. She told me I could head back, and that if I was ever needed again, I could send word through the captain of the Beldon Mercenary Corps. Then she stopped. Beldon Mercenary Corps. Derek. She had heard that name before. At the last salon, Iselin had mentioned a mercenary by that name. Alente's eyes went wide. She dropped every trace of noble decorum and grabbed my hand. Was it really me, the mercenary who had taught Della 1-star magic? I ended up at her residence until evening. She was direct about it. As long as she could beat Iselin, she was willing to do whatever it took. She wanted to reach 2 stars before Iselin did. And if that was impossible, she at least wanted to win their next spar, just once. I told her that was extraordinary competitive drive. She said maybe it looked like competitiveness now, but in the past, she had gone further than that. She had used methods she wasn't proud of, talked about Iselin behind her back, and the result was absurd. Iselin had responded by understanding her and offering comfort. I said nothing. It wasn't my moment to speak. After a long silence, she asked why she was telling me all this. She said she was laying her weakness bare so I could see she was sincere. She also had questions. She asked me, having stayed with the Duplain family, I had seen Iselin's strength up close, and she had just shown me her own. So what exactly did she need to do to beat her? It was clear Alente had been living in Iselin's shadow for a long time. I thought about it for a while. I started to say that as long as she kept working on her strength, then I stopped. The eyes in front of me weren't waiting for pleasantries. There was only sincerity there. She had handed her real feelings to someone she had called a vulgar mercenary not long ago. Saying something empty at a moment like that would be an insult to her. I held her gaze and said it plainly. She could not win. Not ever. I watched her face. If she lashed out, I would leave and not come back. She said, even so, she still wanted to win. Not a single flinch. Only then did I understand. She had probably heard that answer before. She pointed out that I had turned a notorious Della into a 1-star mage. If anyone had a way to help her beat Iselin, it was me. I told her it wasn't completely impossible, but there were two things I needed her to understand first. She straightened up and slipped back into that noble posture. She said now we could talk properly. The first, did she know how I had actually taught Della? I was not academy trained. I had no mentor's patience, no formal structure. She said she could do anything too. And the second point, I was a mercenary. So what? Let people talk. Let them say the famous Miss Alente was learning magic from a mercenary. She was serious about this. She intended to become someone renowned across the entire empire. If she couldn't even take first place in the L-Best social circle, that would be embarrassing. She told me not to use trivial reasons to question her sincerity. She understood better than anyone what mattered more than pride. I listened to all of it the way I would listen to a commission briefing. Then I told her she had to pay a reasonable fee. There were no mercenaries in this world who worked for free. She froze completely. The moment she realized she had misunderstood the whole second point, her face went red. She said any amount was fine, then quietly asked if the room felt a little warm. It did not. But I said nothing. The next day, at the social gathering, Iseline told the other girls there would be a magic sparring match and that she planned to train hard. They were surprised the time had come so soon. Alente approached her, unusually humble. Iseline told her she had just been talking about her. The two walked off together and Alente said she needed to prepare. She had not lost a single match recently and carried the name Flower of House Duplain. Iseline smiled and said, since her opponent was the red-haired one, she couldn't afford to drop her guard. Alente mentioned she had found a new instructor and was feeling confident. Iseline was surprised she trusted him so quickly. Alente corrected her. It wasn't that she trusted the instructor. It was that she trusted Iseline's judgment of him. Then she told her the instructor was Derek. That caught Iseline off guard. Alente had been expecting frustration, maybe jealousy. What she got instead was genuine warmth. Iseline said I was someone she trusted. Alente hesitated, then thanked her. It wasn't the reaction she had prepared for. As Iseline stood there quietly thinking, remembering something Della had told her, Alente smiled to herself. Certain Iseline would be burning with envy, knowing I was now hers as a tutor. She was still laughing about it in her head when Iseline looked like she was about to say something revealing. Alente cut in immediately, told her it was her first lesson and she needed to leave early, and walked out before anything else could come out. Iseline watched her go, quietly hoping nothing went wrong. Somewhere on the sidelines, a white-haired girl watched and noted that both of them were working very hard. Back at Belden's headquarters, I pushed all of it aside and focused on the work in front of me. The tavern owner looked at the growing stack of requests tied to House Belmard and complained that my workload kept piling up. I told him at least I no longer had to travel all the way to the Earl's estate. As long as the work could be handled here in Ebelstein, it made no real difference to me. He said I made it sound easy, then asked the question he actually cared about. Could Our Lady really defeat Iseline in the upcoming match? I paused, then said the situation was not a total dead end. I still had one option. If Alente could break through the 2-star bottleneck before the match, she could use the rank advantage in a direct clash and secure the win. He told me to set that hopeful scenario aside and asked what the most realistic plan was. I told him that was exactly what I wanted to discuss, and that I would need his help. To keep everything safe, I would also need Pauline. He stared at me. He said I was clearly plotting something reckless and far from reasonable. I told him the entire plan was dangerous from the start. At that exact moment, Pauline burst through the door. She announced loudly that it was very dangerous, that those people were complete swindlers, that they had scanned her thoroughly, made her suffer, and squeezed every last coin out of her. The captain and I sat in silence and let her finish. By evening, I arrived at House Belmard. I told her the first step was live combat training, 10 consecutive rounds. Only after that would we examine the finer details of her magic in depth. I told her I needed to see her true combat ability first. She said the approach suited my mercenary background perfectly. Even the lessons were brutal. I told her if she was ready, we would begin. Training ran until sunset. By the end, the courtyard looked like it had been through a small war. Alente was bent over, gasping, wrung out completely. I told her she had worked hard and to rest 10 minutes. After that, we would move on to fundamental magic theory. She stared at me. 10 minutes. She said she didn't have a single shred of mana left. I told her if she truly pushed, she could still draw some out. Then I told her the shapes of her spells were wrong and to sharpen her concentration and form 10 more ice spears. She forced the magic out. I told her she was still 5 short. Then I ordered 100 mana arrows. She said weakly that she genuinely had nothing left. She eventually collapsed flat on the ground. Only then did I tell her she had worked hard and could go eat dinner. I asked if she was all right and mentioned that if she truly felt she couldn't continue, giving up was always an option. She sat straight back up. She asked if after putting her through all of that, I was seriously telling her to quit. She said that before we started, I had spoken with such grave warnings she had expected something truly unbearable, and this was just ordinary hard work. She told me I had no idea what she had endured to survive in high society. I told her it seemed I had underestimated her. She declared she was only slightly tired because she had come straight from a social gathering. Starting tomorrow, she said, she would show me what she was actually capable of. And from that point, I had better raise the intensity to an entirely different level. She even said the warm-up had barely made her break a sweat. I paused at the word tomorrow and asked what she meant by that. She looked confused. I reminded her of what I had said earlier. This was dinner break. She looked at me and said I had a very strange sense of humor. I told her I hadn't taken this job to joke around with her. Under blazing sunlight, I drove Alante well past every limit she thought she had. 5 more arrows. I told her she hadn't reached her true limit yet. Mana was still flickering around her. I doubled it to 10. I gave her a choice, more magic or a punishing run. She chose the run. Her legs gave out and she collapsed onto a garden bench, chest heaving. I leaned in to assess her. She looked up and smiled. She said she enjoyed the suffering. When I offered her the option to quit, she rejected it without hesitation. Surrender was not a choice. That earned her no rest. I called her straight back to spar. 2 relentless weeks passed under the cold winter sun. Alente was slumped over a stone table, completely spent. She asked Denise to wake her when Iceline arrived and admitted how drained the constant training had left her. Denise agreed gently, then asked why she pushed herself this far. Valente's answer was simple. She wanted to win. Nothing else mattered. Denise offered quiet encouragement. Then Iceline appeared. Alente jolted upright in a panic, desperate not to be seen like that. From across the courtyard, Iceline casually invited others to visit a new clothing store. Alente kept her face hidden and anxiously waited until Denise confirmed she had gone. The shame lingered even after. Iceline had paused briefly on her way out. The exhaustion on Alente's face. She said nothing. Later, in her chambers, a maid brought an ornate chest from House Duplain, a gift from Iceline, a rare mana recovery elixir. The explanation had barely finished before Alente's expression went cold. She told the maid to throw it away. The maid hesitated. Alente repeated herself, "Remove it, all of it." She turned her attention back to training and asked where I was. I had been preparing since dawn. A letter sat nearby. A note from Iceline's territory, warmly written, wishing everyone well as winter arrived. Alente read it as pity. She walked into the courtyard where I was waiting, skipped every pleasantry, and asked me for an honest evaluation of her progress. I studied her in silence for a moment. Then I told her she should consider giving up. That lit a fire in her. She challenged me. Furious. I offered a hollow apology and did not take it back. Her voice trembled as she told me her only goal was victory. She demanded to know how to defeat Iceline. She had hired me to help her win, not to tell her it was hopeless. If I wasn't going to help, I could leave. I didn't move. I asked her what she would do if victory was impossible. I told her an obsession with winning could become its own obstacle, that there were times when accepting defeat was necessary for growth. Tears spilled down her face. And then everything came out. She confessed all of it. The rumors she had spread about Iceline, the resentment she had fed for years. She admitted she was petty, jealous, and then, in the middle of it all, she reached the truth she had been circling around the entire time. She no longer had a real reason to hate Iceline. The hatred had never truly been aimed at Iceline. It had always been aimed inward. Her voice broke as she said the word self-hatred. The obsession with winning was never about Iceline. It was always about escaping her own sense of inferiority. She had wanted me to see her resolve, even if it meant showing me her ugliest self. Silence settled between us. Then I stepped forward. My voice was steady. We were going to win. That was my answer. She looked up. She gave a single nod and stepped forward. Days later, a carriage rolled to a stop outside the residence of Count Belmart. Alente's former teacher stepped out and surveyed his surroundings. A red-haired man approached with composed ease, welcomed him, and remarked that the journey to Aberstein must have gone smoothly. The noble acknowledged the journey must have been tiring and invited him to sit. The noble said it had been some time since he had seen Alente and asked how she was doing. The teacher said she was progressing well and had recently been putting serious effort into her magic. The noble reacted with visible admiration. He said he had never met a girl with talent like hers and that it would not be long before she surpassed even him. The teacher listened and kept his expression composed. If the truth surfaced that Alente was being trained by a commoner, the consequences would fall on both of them. The noble then mentioned casually that he also had matters to attend to in Aberstein. The teacher responded politely and assured him Alente would be delighted. On the outskirts of Aberstein stood a massive door, the entrance to the nameless labyrinth. Pinane said something felt wrong. She asked if it was really wise to send someone as fragile as Alente into a dungeon. Jaden told her calmly that I'd likely already considered everything. Alente stood there, clearly startled, and slowly realized she was the one expected to go in. She asked what exactly she was supposed to do inside. Was she just meant to fight monsters head-on? I told her it was the weakest dungeon in the region. Her task was to sharpen her instincts through real combat. I and the others would be watching. She would be safe. She asked if this was truly serious, still struggling to believe it. I released a surge of energy and told her plainly the duel was days away. Time was short, and this was the most efficient method available. Then I walked forward. She followed, looking like someone who had just realized the joke was on her. The four of us moved in together. Silence closed around us immediately. She hesitated and asked what was waiting inside. I told her to stay alert at all times. Even the weakest dungeon could kill you if you stopped paying attention. That didn't help her nerves. Peeling called it first. A horde of goblins coming fast. Awente reacted loudly. Then, Jaden identified something larger in the dark, something resembling an ogre. I turned to Jaden and asked if he could handle it. He smirked and said that depended on payment. I let another surge of energy out and told him we could discuss payment after we survived. Every pair of glowing eyes in the darkness turned toward us at once. Alente stood frozen. The reality of fighting monsters. The goblins charged. I stepped to the front and met them head-on. Behind me, Alente tried to speak. Fear had taken most of her voice. I ordered Paline to cover her and pushed forward. Paline worked from distance, arrows clearing threats from multiple angles. I moved through them with sword and fire, cutting a clean path. The three of us ran like a machine. Alente stood completely still in the middle of it. Then she sensed something massive behind her. She turned. Jaden was already in its path, quietly wondering aloud about the bounty on the creature. The giant goblin swung. Jaden stepped in and took its arm off in one clean motion. She watched all of it, and something in her composure crumbled entirely. She could actually die here. Everything around her felt impossible to process. I turned back and told her sharply, "Goblin straight at her, stay alert." It was already closing in. Her mind went white. Her body refused to move. Fear had taken everything. My voice came from behind her, firm and clear. She had to defeat it herself. Something shifted inside her as the goblin closed the distance. Fragments of her past surfaced one after another. How naive she had been. How much talk with nothing behind it. The envy. The whispers behind someone else's back. She saw herself clearly for the first time, and in the middle of all that terror, something hardened. This moment was exactly why she had come. She summoned the massive ice arrow. The cold energy formed vividly around her. The goblin lunged. The arrow surged forward and tore straight through it. One shot, clean. The rest of the team went quiet too. Up until that moment, she had contributed nothing. She had looked almost helpless. Now, she had taken something down on her own. She stood there afterward, trembling slightly, and slowly lifted her eyes toward me. I told her calmly that this was only the beginning. She smiled, a quiet one. Beneath the stone walls of Ebelstein, I sat reading the same letter again. It was from Claudia Flameheart. She wrote that more than 2 years had passed since she left Ebelstein and apologized for reaching out so late. She was currently teaching the young lady of House Oster and had been busy. The girl had shown great enthusiasm for magic. Despite all that, she wrote fondly about the time she had spent in Ebelstein, that those difficult days had given her a rare kind of freedom. She said that among every maid she had encountered, I stood out as the most talented. She asked what level I had reached and told me that when we met again, I should show her how far I had come. The letter ended simply, signed by my old master. I had gone back to it every chance I got for the past 2 weeks. Alente noticed. She asked about it. I told her it was from my master. She said my teacher must have been remarkable to have the patience to guide someone like me. I told her without hesitation that she truly was. Alente paused and admitted she had only been trying to tease me. I asked her which part was meant to provoke me. She had nothing to say to that and let it go. I reminded her the duel was 2 days away and asked how she felt. She hesitated, sat with the question for a moment, then looked up with a steady expression and said she intended to win. The Noble District's magic dueling grounds were already packed when we arrived. The air was thick with anticipation. Iceline spotted me from across the crowd and excused herself from her company to call out to me. She greeted me warmly and mentioned she had heard I was overseeing Alente's magic training. I told her our meeting had been nothing more than coincidence. She said I hadn't changed at all and asked if I was pushing Alente too hard. She had heard from Della that I was not a conventional teacher and that Alente had looked noticeably worn out. I told her that worrying about your opponent usually meant having confidence in yourself. She asked what I meant. I told her not to underestimate anyone, regardless of who they were. Around us, the nobles had already started talking. Most believed Iceline would win easily unless Alente managed to produce 2-star magic. Others noted quietly how pale and tired Alente looked. Then Iceline stepped onto the field. The crowd reacted immediately. Her elegance pulled every eye in the room. Not far away, Alente stepped forward, each footfall steady, one thought repeating in her mind with every step. She would win. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead. I watched from behind as she walked toward her opponent. Aisling greeted her politely and said she hoped Alante had been well. Alante returned the courtesy and added that Aisling's calm had always inspired her. Aisling denied it softly and admitted she had never felt this nervous before a duel. Alante gave a small smile and suggested they begin. Both gathered their mana at once. Blue energy spread around Isoline. Bright orange flames surged around Alente. Alente moved first. She launched a wave of fire projectiles upward until the sky above the arena was filled with blazing arrows, then let them fall all at once like a storm. As she pushed the assault, she heard my voice in the back of her mind. She had asked me how she could win if the duel came down to pure magical skill. I had told her plainly that she would lose. My answer had been something else entirely. Willpower. I had trained her to push past every limit and spend every last drop of mana she had. When she had joked that it sounded like a strange hobby of mine, I had denied it and explained the logic. Once both sides ran dry, the fight would no longer be about technique. It would be about endurance. The strategy was to make her magic as overwhelming and relentless as possible, force the duel into a war of attrition. The one who could draw out even a fraction more mana at the end would win. She had asked what happened if Isoline's reserves were far greater. I told her she would lose. Then I reminded her of her bloodline and told her to trust herself. Back in the arena, the crowd watched in stunned silence. Even Isoline's own supporters couldn't help wondering if Alante had always been this strong. Alante raised her arm and intensified the barrage. Flames rained across the arena without pause. Isoline didn't falter. She expanded her blue mana outward into a wide defensive barrier and held it steady under the falling fire. Her expression sharpened. She focused completely, resolved that she would be the one to walk away from this. The fire arrows struck the barrier one after another. The force built until a massive explosion shook the field. Alante's mana reserves had grown enormously. Even so, Isoline's barrier held, glowing steady through the smoke. She assessed calmly. Alante's firepower was overwhelming but unrestrained, burning through mana at a pace that wouldn't last. Through the smoke, she sensed movement and tracked Alante repositioning under cover. She formed an ice arrow and fired with precision, seemingly catching her in the chest, only for the figure to dissolve into an illusion. That single moment of surprise was all Alante needed. She appeared behind Isoline, a massive ice spear already formed and ready. At that range, Isoline barely sensed it in time. No opportunity to raise a barrier. A memory surfaced, me explaining the plan. Overwhelm with flames, myriad with illusion, close in for the decisive strike. Alante executed it exactly. Isoline made her decision in an instant. She gathered every remaining trace of mana into a single concentrated sphere and released it the moment the spear struck. The explosion threw her backward. The spear missed and tore into the ground instead, shattering it on impact. She landed, steadied herself, and stood firm. Alante froze at the speed of that recovery. She recalculated. Her opponent was far more skilled than she had accounted for. She shifted approach entirely. No incantation, pure will, and summoned countless ice spears straight from the ground, blanketing the field in sharp spikes as she advanced without stopping. The crowd went silent again. Generating magic at that scale through willpower alone was something else. I watched from the sidelines and said nothing. Alante had taken the bait exactly as I expected. Isoline prepared her counter. She had seen the growth. She had adjusted. So had I. Alante had already set the trap before any of it began. A concealed flame arrow had been waiting silently in the sky, and at exactly the right moment, it came down and destroyed Isoline's entire formation of ice spears in seconds. Isoline looked up in shock. She realized the attack had been planned for much earlier. She went still for a moment. Alante lowered her hand with a faint smirk. The momentum had shifted, but Isoline felt something she hadn't felt in a while. She couldn't predict the next move. Even the crowd had noticed both fighters were now evenly matched. Doubt crept in. She couldn't win under the current conditions. She took a breath and chose to reset entirely. Her expression sharpened. The hesitation left her face. I noticed the shift the instant it happened. Isoline raised her hand. Blue mana began gathering around her, growing denser with every passing second. The pressure built until it stopped feeling like magic and started feeling like something heavier. The mana in the surrounding air bending toward her, falling silent, submitting. Every trace of ambient mana in the arena disappeared. Mana alignment, a rare state where a mage surpasses their limits and forces all surrounding mana into submission. I had heard of it. I had never seen it this close. Then the fireball formed above the battlefield. It expanded rapidly, distorting the air around it, radiating heat and pressure that pressed against everything in the arena. Alante stared up at it and couldn't move. The sheer size of it made thought difficult. Isoline poured everything she had into it, pushing well beyond her limits. A 2-star fire spell, brought into existence through will alone. A memory surfaced in Alenti's mind, a training session that had left her flat on the ground. I had walked over quietly and handed her a water pouch. She had pushed herself up, taken it, and after a moment admitted she wasn't sure she could beat Iceline. Just weeks into training, I had looked at her with mild puzzlement and told her without hesitation that she would win, then paused and added, in a certain sense. She had looked at me too tired to even ask what that meant. The memory broke as the crowd erupted. Was that truly a 2-star spell? Alente's eyes were wide, mouth slightly open. This was not part of the plan. She looked toward me. I said nothing. Tears pushed at the corners of her eyes. Frustration and fear rose together. Then the fireball surged forward. She froze for a split second, then looked up as her breath caught. The sphere loomed directly above her, descending with full force. Her mind raced. A barrier wouldn't hold a 2-star spell. Ice spears wouldn't stop it either. Doubt flooded in, telling her it was over, that defeating Iceline was impossible. Then her instincts took over. She released a burst of mana forward and used the recoil to throw herself backward. Iceline's eyes widened slightly at the move. A moment later, the fireball hit the ground. The explosion swallowed the battlefield. The shockwave hit Alente mid-roll and pushed her back violently. She lost her footing, hit the ground, and rolled across it, narrowly avoiding the full impact. Smoke thickened around everything. At the center of it, Iceline stood breathing hard. One attack. It had consumed a massive portion of her mana. That was exactly what I had been waiting for. I noted that a 2-star spell without proper mastery was nothing more than a beast that devoured its caster's mana. Alant's hand trembled slightly as she clenched her fist. Watching her closely, I could tell she was changing. Ellen had always possessed overwhelming talent, but now she was pushing beyond that talent and giving everything she had. This was her way of showing respect. Anyone willing to fight that hard deserved to be met with equal effort. A faint smile appeared on her lips as a realization settled in. If she could endure a little longer, she could win. Ellen raised her hand once more. Blue mana transformed into blazing heat as she began casting again. Soon, another massive 2-star fireball hovered above her hand. With a powerful motion, she launched the fireball. Gasps spread through the crowd. The attack was even faster than the previous one. The blazing spear tore through the air at terrifying speed and rushed straight toward Alant. She reacted immediately and turned to evade it. But Ellen adjusted the spell with subtle movements of her hand. The fireball curved through the air, relentlessly tracking its target. At the last possible moment, Alant made her move. She dropped low and planted both hands against the ground. Then she released a burst of mana beneath herself and kicked upward. She soared upward until her silhouette blended into the brightness of the sun. Ellen tried to follow her movements, but the glare made it nearly impossible. Hidden within the sunlight, she allowed herself a small smile. She raised her hand and began creating ice spears one after another. The sharp weapons floated around her as she prepared her attack. She understood that if Ellen attempted to use a barrier, it would only consume the little mana she had remaining. Below, Ellen struggled to stay on her feet. With the last of her strength, she cast a spell. A layer of ice formed before her and intercepted the attack. As Alant landed, she frowned slightly. It was not a proper barrier. It was merely a simple ice construct. At that moment, she understood. Ellen had consumed too much mana, controlling the fireballs. Her condition was obvious now. Her face had gone pale. Watching from the sidelines, I concluded that the battle would end soon. Alant straightened her posture and stepped forward. Confidence returned to her face. A small smile spread across her lips. She believed she had cornered Ellen. There was no way Ellen had enough mana left to continue. By her estimate, she still had enough energy to cast magic arrows or ice spears at least 2 more times. She convinced herself that would be enough. Then a sharp cracking sound echoed across the battlefield. Awan's eyes widened. A hidden fireball burst through the shattered ice. The force was so great that it pushed her backward. She poured everything she had left into that final strike. Meanwhile, the fireball surged toward Alant. At the last moment, it veered off course. Silence fell over the battlefield. She lowered her guard and looked back toward Ellen. Ellen lay on the ground in silence. Her body shook uncontrollably. She had pushed far beyond her limits. Desperately, she tried to gather mana once more. Alant stepped forward. Slowly, for the first time, something unfamiliar appeared in her eyes. Fear. In Averstein, the nobles had always shone brighter than everyone else. At the center of that brilliance stood Iseline. She was admired, praised, placed above everyone around her. For Alant, however, that brilliance had cast a long shadow. She had lived beneath it for as long as she could remember. While Iseline grew up surrounded by admiration and comfort, Alant endured whispers and ridicule. People laughed at her. They waited eagerly for her to fail. Those memories remained carved deeply into her heart. Even so, she never stopped moving forward. Within that darkness, she continued sharpening herself. She held onto the belief that one day she would rise above it all and prove her worth. As those thoughts faded, she returned her focus to the present. Iseline remained on her knees, completely exhausted. Her mana was nearly gone. Her hands trembled slightly. yet her expression stayed calm. Even covered in dirt and having collapsed before everyone, she still carried herself with quiet dignity. That composure confused Alant. It felt as though Iceline had nothing to hide and nothing to protect. She had simply given everything she had without hesitation. From the stands, voices erupted as spectators cheered for Iceline to stand up and continue. At the same time, Alant stepped forward and raised her hand. For a brief moment, her eyes drifted toward me as she remembered my teachings. She believed she could win, yet something inside her refused to settle. Even standing on the edge of victory, she felt a heavy weight in her chest. No matter the outcome, part of her feared she would return to the same place she had always been. Across from her, Iceline forced herself to move. Then Alant suddenly spoke. Her words carried a quiet weight that caught Iseline completely off guard. Alant slowly lowered her hand. Then she calmly admitted that she had run out of mana. For a moment, Iseline simply stared at her. She could not understand what she had just heard. Alant smiled softly and continued. She praised Iseline's strength and admitted that she still could not surpass her. Before Iseline could react, Alant placed a hand over her chest. Then she bowed her head and surrendered. A heartbeat later, the entire crowd erupted into cheers. Everyone celebrated Iseline's victory. Meanwhile, Iseline remained frozen in place. She stayed on her knees, unable to believe what had just happened. Even as the cheers grew louder, the result still felt unreal. Her friends rushed over and surrounded her. They congratulated her and eagerly asked about the powerful magic she had used. She answered with a shy smile, still overwhelmed by everything. Eventually, her attention drifted across the arena. Alant was already walking away alone. Nearby, I stood reading a book. When I noticed her approaching, I quietly closed it and set it aside. Alant spoke first. She asked if I had seen everything clearly. She smiled playfully and joked about how surprised everyone must have been. She specifically mentioned the look on Iseline's face when she surrendered. The memory made her laugh, but as she laughed, tears slowly began forming in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away and tried to keep smiling. Then she admitted that despite losing, she felt satisfied. She asked what I thought of her performance. Even if the ending had not been perfect, she wanted to know whether she had done well. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I watched her carefully. Little by little, her expression changed. The smile faded. The tears remained. Without understanding why, she began crying harder. Unable to hold herself together any longer, she walked to a quiet corner and sat down. Frustrated, she muttered that she was no longer a child. I told her there was nothing to criticize about her performance. Her hard work had been obvious for everyone to see. Alant paused, yet the tears continued falling. From behind her hands, she finally admitted the truth. More than anything else, she had wanted to win. But at the final moment, something had stopped her. She confessed that even if she had won, she felt nothing would truly change. She believed she would still return to the same place she had always been. I remained silent at first and simply listened. After some time, a faint, bitter smile crossed her lips as she admitted that when it came to doubting herself, she was far ahead of Iseline. Derek responded quietly, saying that he was not much different from her. His words made her pause. He then added something simple but meaningful. Even if she looked a little pathetic, it didn't matter. Alant looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. Meeting her gaze, Derek explained that if she was afraid of appearing weak, she would never be able to grow beyond where she stood. Hearing those words, she covered her face once more, overwhelmed by emotion. Her thoughts drifted as memories rose and faded like ripples on water. She pictured Iseline again, standing far ahead, seemingly untouched by the darkness that had always followed her. Yet this time, something felt different. For the first time, she no longer felt completely trapped. From a distance, Denise quietly observed the scene before turning her attention back to Iseline. Stepping forward, she approached with a gentle smile and praised her performance in the duel. After a brief pause, she admitted that something didn't feel right. It didn't feel as though she had truly won. Denise lowered her gaze slightly, smiling without giving a direct answer. Iseline grew more serious and explained that the gap between them wasn't simply a matter of talent. She believed Alant had already surpassed her in ways that mattered far more than skill alone, and the speed of her growth proved it. As she spoke, the image of Derek suddenly crossed her mind, catching her off guard. She quickly pushed the thought away. Turning to her maid, she gave a firm order to prepare a letter for the main estate. Then she lifted her gaze once more, her expression sharpening with renewed determination. At the Dolphin Estate, the Duke carefully read through a letter. Drested Wolfdale. A 6-star travel pass had suddenly appeared in Ebelstein. His eldest son explained that the reason for Drested's arrival remained unknown. However, the customs agreement had been advanced earlier than expected, most likely in response to Sir Drest's movements. The Duke reflected on this, recalling how unusual it had been for the Count of Belmere to visit Ebelstein. Connecting the dots, he realized it all traced back to Drested. Someone who stood at the pinnacle of divination and foresight would never move without purpose. His son then informed him that another letter had arrived, this time from Iselin. The letter contained a request for a magic teacher. The Duke casually suggested assigning one of their own instructors. However, his son clarified that the situation was more complicated than that. Iceline had specifically requested Derek. Furthermore, Derek was currently staying at the Beliemer estate where he was teaching magic to Lady Elant. Considering the circumstances, the eldest son proposed sending their butler to negotiate on their behalf. The Duke immediately dismissed the idea. There was no need for that. Since he already had to travel to Ebelstein because of the matter involving Drested, he decided to handle everything personally while he was there. As evening approached, the scene shifted to Derek and Iseline quietly sharing tea together. Iseline revealed that she intended to take a break from her studies for a while. After everything that had happened, she wanted time to clear her mind. She acknowledged that he would likely continue accepting assignments from the Belden Mercenary Corps. Derek agreed without hesitation. Then, with a subtle change in atmosphere, Iseline leaned forward slightly and gently rested her foot over Derek's beneath the table. A playful smile appeared on her face. She asked if he would come again whenever she called for him. Specifically, she wanted him to continue teaching her magic. Caught off guard for a brief moment, Derek quickly regained his composure and assured her that he would. At the same time, he admitted that he wasn't sure whether there was anything left for him to teach her. Iseline laughed softly and teased him for being unusually humble. Turning her gaze toward the window, she observed the changing season. Winter was finally coming to an end. Later that night, Derek returned to his shop. His two subordinates immediately greeted him with visible excitement. He responded with a calm smile, acknowledging their welcome. Elsewhere, the Count of Bamir was seen traveling toward an unknown destination. Meanwhile, Iseline was fast asleep in her room when her maid repeatedly knocked on the door. Annoyed, she pulled a pillow over her ears and complained that she had already decided to start resting today. There would be no lessons. The maid hesitated before explaining that this situation was different and suggested that Iseline should see for herself. Reluctantly, she climbed out of bed and walked toward the door. However, the moment she opened the door, she froze. Standing before her was her father. The man looked at her with overwhelming affection. Completely caught off guard, Iseline immediately slammed the door shut. Her mind raced in confusion. Why was her father here? She opened the door once more and forced an awkward smile onto her face. Politely, she asked what had brought him all the way here and requested a moment to change into proper clothing before meeting him. Soon afterward, the two sat together, sharing tea as they talked. Her father brought up the recent duel with the young lady of House Duplain, noting that she couldn't have been an easy opponent. Iseline nodded and admitted that she had learned a great deal from the encounter. The Duke then turned the conversation toward Derek. If a mere mercenary could teach so effectively, he reasoned, then perhaps it would be best to keep him exclusively under the Belmere Estate's banner. Elant hesitated, pointing out that the vassals would likely oppose such a decision. In response, her father let out a confident chuckle and assured her that there was nothing he wouldn't do for his beloved daughter. He encouraged her to trust him completely. The scene then shifted to Derek and his companions as they hunted goblins together. Everything seemed routine until a goblin suddenly lunged at him from behind. Derek reacted at once, activating his mana. However, the moment he did, he sensed something strange. 3-star mana. It was a power far beyond anything he was accustomed to handling. Acting on instinct, he cast a fireball. The result was overwhelming. A massive surge of fire mana erupted from his hand, creating a destructive explosion far beyond his control. The explosion echoed throughout the area. Later, they returned to the shop. After hearing what happened, their uncle was horrified to learn that Derek had nearly gotten himself killed. The blonde subordinate was even less forgiving. She couldn't believe that anyone would attempt a 3-star spell while hunting ordinary goblins. The feeling reminded him of the first time he had reached 2-star mana. Just then, an unfamiliar voice spoke from behind him. An elderly man wearing a cloak stepped forward calmly. "There is no need to be anxious simply because your growth has stalled." He explained that the School of the Wild originally pursued harmony and natural flow rather than forceful advancement. At the same time, he admitted that such advice rarely worked on mages like Derek. What immediately caught his attention was the fact that he couldn't sense even the slightest trace of mana from him, and yet he instinctively knew exactly who he was. Standing before him was the first and greatest 6-star search-type mage. The old man removed his cloak, revealing himself as the wandering spirit, Drested Wolfdale. With a calm smile, he casually asked whether they had any decent alcohol available, mentioning that his travels had left him rather exhausted. Night had fallen over Della's estate. Despite the late hour, Della continued training alone. A visible layer of mana spread across the ground around her like a living field. Concentrating intensely, she attempted to draw power from it. Her goal was simple. She wanted to create ice spears directly from the mana surrounding her. Unfortunately, every attempt ended in failure. Again and again she tried. Again and again, nothing worked. Each failure drained her mana. Della dropped onto the ground and threw her head back in annoyance. "I thought you'd matured a little." His smile widened, "But your temper looks exactly the same." Despite all the teasing, He admitted that summoning 5 ice spears simultaneously was impressive. Maybe that's what happens when you finally get yourself a good teacher.
Della rejected the idea immediately. He told her that Azaleen was planning to hire that same selfish fellow as her magic teacher. That landed. Della reacted instantly, shock then strong objection. She was genuinely worried that Azaleen would end up being put through the same treatment she had. Her brother told her not to say things that might cause misunderstandings about me. He mentioned something he had heard at a recent ball, that Lady Eleni also intended to continue employing me. Della puffed her cheeks and said nothing for a moment, quietly trying to work out why that man was so popular despite everything. Her brother answered that one plainly. I had taken someone like her, a former troublemaker, and turned her into a proper person. Naturally, people were going to notice. She shouted at him, demanding to know who exactly he was calling a rat. She lowered her head. In a quieter voice, she admitted that she really had been like that before. Her brother's smirk returned. He suggested it might actually work in her favor if I chose to take Azaleen on. That way, Della might get another chance to see me again. Then, almost to himself, he reflected that my reputation seemed to be spreading faster than expected. He said he hoped the number of people competing for my attention didn't grow any further.
I was still at the Beldun Tavern when Dressed Wolftail calmly sipped his drink. I couldn't understand why someone as extraordinary as Dressed Wolftail, a mage of such immense power, would choose to stay in a place like this. He suddenly called my name and asked if I was really Derek. I immediately answered respectfully. At the same time, I was shocked that he already knew who I was. He then politely asked if we could speak in private. Not long afterward, we walked through the quiet streets under the night sky while talking. He said my abilities felt unusual and difficult to define. According to him, it was probably something I had never heard before because my skills were already impressive on their own. Then he asked why I worked so hard. What was I truly trying to achieve through magic? I honestly admitted that I didn't have any grand dreams. I simply became curious about how far I could grow and how much stronger I could become. My answer seemed to interest him. With a smile, he said that for a commoner aiming to reach heights beyond his station, I was still lacking in many areas. Even so, he offered to teach me. The moment I heard those words, countless thoughts flooded my mind. Who exactly was Dressed Wolftail? He was a legendary 6-star mage who had been born a commoner. After starting a family, he advanced even further and entered the 3-star realm. To countless commoners, he became a symbol of hope. His village eventually turned into a gathering place for commoner mages seeking knowledge and opportunity. The year he reached the 4-star realm, Dressed returned home and found his entire family murdered. The horrifying scene left him completely devastated. Elsewhere, a count casually discussed the situation with his butler. The count asked whether Dressed had finally calmed down. The butler confidently replied that Dressed had already gone into hiding. He also reported that the arrogant commoner mages who followed him had quieted down. The count laughed mockingly. He remarked that commoners became frightened far too easily and wondered why they were so greedy for magic in the first place. Then he coldly declared that if Dressed ever showed himself again, unfortunately for him, Dressed decided to attend that meeting personally. In a single strike, he cut off the butler's head. The count instantly tried to flee, but Dressed severed both of his legs, sending him crashing to the floor. The count begged for mercy. Dressed didn't care. Consumed by hatred, he killed the count without hesitation. After that day, Dressed spent 30 years as a fugitive while being hunted by both the imperial family and the nobility. During those years, he continued growing stronger. Eventually, he surpassed the 5-star realm and became a true 6-star mage. Only then did the imperial family realize a terrifying fact. If they continued treating Dressed as an enemy, the kingdom itself could be placed in danger. As a result, they officially acknowledged that his revenge had been justified. To preserve their authority, they granted him a noble title. Dressed became a man who earned nobility through the sheer power of his magic alone. Back in the present, I could hardly believe that someone like him was personally offering to teach me. There was no reason for me to refuse. Soon afterward, the scene shifted to the noble district of Ebelstein, specifically the central conference room of Cleon Hall. Inside, Grand Duke Duplain, Grand Duke Veltis Endeloff, and the Count of Belmord sat together discussing political affairs. During the meeting, Grand Duke Veltis warned Duplain that if he planned to expand north of the Belkos Peninsula, he needed to be extremely careful of the labyrinths located within the White Zone. Veltis even offered to send his knights if assistance was needed. However, Grand Duke Duplain immediately mocked the offer. He sarcastically asked if the knights Veltis was referring to were nothing more than lowly mercenaries. Veltis simply smirked and replied that managing such a large territory with only private soldiers must be quite challenging. He casually added that surrendering the territory was always an option. Those words clearly irritated Duplain. Sensing the tension rising, the Count of Belmerde quickly let out an awkward laugh and tried to ease the situation. He suggested that since the meeting was practically over, Perhaps everyone should visit their children instead. Duplain then recalled hearing that the Count's daughter, Alante, had fought Azaline on equal footing. The Count smiled proudly and admitted that, although Alante had ultimately lost, her talent had finally begun to blossom. He confidently stated that with guidance from a capable instructor, she would eventually surpass Lady Azaline. At that point, Duplain mentioned my name. He coldly remarked that if I became Azaline's instructor instead, Alante would never be able to overtake her. The Count was slightly annoyed by the comment. He replied that such a thing was unlikely because my relationship with Alante was already quite strong. Duplain completely disagreed. He doubted I would make important decisions based solely on personal connections. Meanwhile, Grand Duke Veltis silently wondered who I really was. He immediately decided to have Denise investigate me personally.
A while later at the tavern, the Count walked in. That caught the captain off guard. The Count asked if he was the commander of the mercenary corps, then sat down and called for drinks. He said he had received no word from his butler, so he had come himself. The captain told him I had been missing for days, refusing every request that came in. The Count began to wonder quietly whether a rival had already gotten to me first. On the outskirts of Ebelstein, at the Grand Duke Volt's residence, the white-haired girl sat with an apple in one hand and a letter in the other. She asked her maid when it had arrived. The maid said this morning.
Inside the letter, Veltis instructed Denise to find a man named Derek as quickly as possible and recruit him as her instructor. She assumed her father was in such a hurry because my value was currently at its lowest point, making this the perfect opportunity to recruit me. Even so, she found the timing incredibly annoying. Today was a very important day for her. In fact, it was the day she had been waiting for more than anything else. A new novel written by her favorite author, Rayleigh, had finally been released. The title was The Lady Submits to the Cold Grand Duke's Ice Greatsword. Even so, she knew she had no choice. If she ignored the order now, her father would spend the next few weeks reminding her every chance he got. Accepting reality, Denise told Bellet to prepare her clothes immediately. With determination in her eyes, she announced that she was heading out because there was someone she needed to find. As the night grew darker, I found myself deep inside a distant cave with dressed wolftail. The cold stone walls echoed softly as we sat across from each other, continuing our training in silence. He explained that I needed to feel the mana spreading throughout the cave, touching every surface before returning to me. Following his instructions, I slowly released my mana. Green energy emerged around me and expanded through the cave like a flowing tide. Dressed then explained that what I was practicing was the foundation of search-type magic. At 1 star, it functioned as simple threat detection. At 2 stars, it could track location. At 3 stars, it became powerful enough to see through disguises and concealment. At 4 stars, the user could see through people themselves. At 5 stars, the ability advanced even further, granting the power to read minds and communicate with the dead. Then came 6 stars, the power to see the future. The revelation stunned me, especially the part about seeing the future. Sensing my reaction, Dressed calmly revealed that he had already seen the future himself. In fact, that was the reason he had come looking for me. He admitted that he needed me for what lay ahead. Hearing that made me uneasy. I wanted to know what kind of future awaited me. Dressed then mentioned a man named Valerian, the eldest son of House Duplain. He explained that before I reached adulthood, Valerian would eventually become involved with necromancy. Because of that future, Dress declared that I would have to kill him before those events could unfold. That answer only created more questions. However, Drest refused to explain further. He said the future was not simple. Learning too much carelessly would only make future events more unstable and unpredictable. Even so, he decided to reveal one final truth. According to the future he had seen, I was destined to die. Drest seemed surprised by my reaction. I pointed out that he had only said I was destined to die. He had never said that I would definitely die. My answer made Drest smile. He admitted that he didn't want me to die either. According to him, I had to survive. And if survival required strength, then he would personally make sure I gained it. To survive what was coming, I would need to become overwhelmingly powerful. As he raised his hand, mana gathered within his palm. Then it exploded outward. A terrifying surge of energy shot into the sky, forming a massive glowing halo around the moon. At that moment, I finally understood one thing. As I watched the overwhelming display of power, I quietly reflected on Dressed Wolftail's words. The scene shifted to a bright and lively morning in the city. A luxurious carriage rolled to a stop, and Denise stepped out. Her beauty immediately drew the attention of nearby pedestrians. She instructed the carriage driver to stay behind and rest while she continued on foot. As Denise walked beside her maid Bella, she noticed the constant stares directed her way. Naturally, she assumed it was because she was beautiful. Bella, however, looked completely unimpressed. She bluntly reminded Denise that her room was always a disaster, that she rarely bothered to wash properly, and that she usually spent her days buried under blankets while reading books. Bella admitted that Denise's normal appearance was already shocking enough, but somehow she looked even worse today. She praised Bella for having such a great sense of humor. Bella immediately clarified that she wasn't joking, not even a little. She then urged Denise to hurry, warning that another noble house might recruit me first. Denise remained unconcerned. Even as she took her time, she believed she was still ahead of everyone else. Denise recalled hearing that I had rejected every offer and disappeared without a trace. She reasoned that I wasn't the type of person who disliked money. If I had abandoned mercenary work, then something more valuable must have appeared. Someone capable of handling magic at my level and age would only walk away from paid work if they had discovered something extraordinary. Denise considered two possibilities. Either I had found a powerful grimoire or encountered an exceptional teacher. However, another detail caught her attention. I had willingly left the Duplain Mansion, one of the best places imaginable for magical training, since there was hardly a better environment for a young mage. That could only mean I had found something even greater. Before she could think any further, Bella announced that they had arrived. The two entered the mercenary guild leader's office. The moment the guild leader saw Denise in person, he looked completely stunned. He explained that even noble young ladies were now searching for me. Unfortunately, he still had no idea where I was. 3 different groups had already visited earlier that morning asking the same question. Denise calmly asked whether Dress Wolftail had visited the guild recently. The guild leader was visibly startled. Satisfied with the information, Denise thanked him and immediately decided to investigate the carriage transit records. The scene then shifted to the Coachman's Guild in Ebelstein's commercial district. There, Denise and Bella carefully searched through official travel records. Bella eventually asked how Denise had known that Drest had visited the guild. Denise explained that the answer had been obvious. I had willingly left the mansion of a 5-star mage despite being completely obsessed with magic. That meant only the arrival of a 6-star mage could have drawn my attention away. Since Denise already knew a 6-star mage was arriving in Ebelstein, she had simply connected the pieces. According to her, the old mage had walked directly into her trap. Feeling proud of herself, Denise wondered whether she might secretly be a genius. Bella immediately shut down that idea. She pointed out that Denise almost never used her brain in the first place. As usual, Denise somehow interpreted the insult as praise. With exaggerated exhaustion, Denise dramatically complained about how difficult life was for someone as talented as herself. She even claimed she wished she could become incompetent. Bella wondered whether Denise genuinely enjoyed hearing her maid talk back to her. She casually remarked that Bella only ever noticed her beautiful side. Still, she raised an important concern. Even if they managed to find me first, recruiting me wouldn't be easy. Powerful families like Duplain and Belmeard were already competing for the same goal. According to her, recruiting me would be the easiest part because she already had the perfect plan. When Bella asked what kind of plan she was talking about, Denise confidently revealed her strategy. A honey trap. Bella looked even more disgusted after hearing that. She reminded Denise that their biggest rival was Lady Alini. Denise immediately argued that she was obviously prettier and desperately sought Bella's approval. At that moment, Bella finally discovered an important record. A week earlier, a boy wearing a robe and carrying a travel pass had traveled toward the outskirts of Ramel Hill and the Laspa Great Cave. The scene then shifted to the Laspa Great Cave itself, where I continued my intense training under Dress Wolftail's guidance. During the session, Drest suddenly sensed unfamiliar presences approaching. He calmly informed me that members of House Veltas had arrived and appeared to be looking for me. Meanwhile, Denise and Bella carefully ventured deeper into the cave. As they moved forward, she repeatedly begged Denise not to continue. Instead, she suggested returning to report everything to the Patriarch and coming back later with soldiers. Denise immediately rejected the idea. If soldiers became involved, she would lose the chance to claim the achievement herself. Even worse, mobilizing troops could attract the attention of rival houses and give someone else the opportunity to steal the credit. Suddenly, Bella froze. In a panic, she pointed toward the darkness ahead. 2 enormous, glowing red eyes were staring directly at them. Denise quickly stepped in front of Bella and prepared for battle. Although the cave was supposed to have been fully cleared, she admitted to herself that offensive magic wasn't her strongest area. Unfortunately, running away now wasn't an option. Then the truth emerged from the darkness. The terrifying red eyes didn't belong to a monster. They belonged to me. I calmly welcomed Lady Denise to such a humble place. The moment she saw me, she froze in shock. At last, the mysterious mercenary she had been searching for stood right before her. Then a confident smile slowly spread across her face. The time had finally come to make me hers. Unfortunately for her, I was still trying to figure out why she had nearly blasted me with a spell 5 seconds earlier. I told her the conversation had been pleasant. Calm. Denise froze. Bella, standing nearby, looked like she was trying very hard not to smile. She failed. Denise recovered quickly. She softened her voice. She said she had admired me for a long time, that she had imagined this meeting countless times, that learning from me would bring her true happiness. It was quite the speech. I stared at her and asked why she was suddenly talking, like she was performing in a stage play. The cave echoed, well, sure, but that was no reason for the dramatics. That finished it. Bella erupted. Denise turned to look at her with the expression of someone who had just watched their masterpiece fall off a wall. She shifted tactics. She brought up the duel between Lady Eileen and Lady Ellen, said the strength of the Roshi trio made her feel left behind, afraid of stagnating while everyone else grew stronger. She stepped closer, closer still, close enough that I could tell she expected my heart to be doing something dramatic. It was not. I pushed her back and put distance between us. I told her I did not find her claims convincing. From everything I had observed, she showed little genuine interest in magic. I reminded her of the earlier incident, the moment she mistook me for a monster and launched an ice spear at my direction. The spell was a disaster. I told her that despite her impressive natural reserves, her magical foundation was a complete mess, proof that she had never taken training seriously. Derek, to his credit, kept his face perfectly still. I told her not to talk about sincerity while standing in front of someone with hidden motives. To anyone who genuinely cared about magic, that kind of performance was an insult. Then I turned and walked away. Without looking back, I told her I did not know what she actually wanted from me, but I was certain it had nothing to do with magic. Then I was gone. That night, outside the cave, tents surrounded a campfire. Denise sat beside the flames in silence. Bella eventually asked if she would be all right. She would not be giving up. If she did, another noble house would reach me first. Bella warned her not to push too far before turning to leave. Denise stopped her. She asked Bella to retrieve the 4th volume of Duke's Pillar of Fire Melts the Commoner Lady by the following day. Bella stood completely still. The next day, I was sitting alone when Denise arrived. She was carrying a box so large it was almost carrying her, stuffed with books, magical crystals, snacks, and training materials stacked in every direction. I looked at it, then at her, then back at it. She caught her breath and explained that even if she could not contribute much herself, she wanted to support my training however she could. I told her it would not change my answer. She smiled anyway and said that watching me train made her feel stronger, which was a strange thing to say, but she seemed to mean it. What she did not say out loud was the actual plan. I looked over the supplies, found the snacks, and started eating. Then I mentioned, between bites, that accepting the gifts still did not make me her teacher. She came back the next day, and the day after that, magical crystals, another. Every time I accepted it. Every time I said the same thing. Denise had returned to camp, located a nearby pillar, cracked and partially collapsed. I will admit, the mana reserve I mentioned was not exaggerated. Before the dust settled, Bella came running with worse news. The head butler of House Duplain was approaching with Denise and Bella hid. The procession that entered camp was, by any reasonable measure, excessive for a simple visit. Watching from cover, Denise apparently wondered aloud whether someone had declared war. The butler approached me with full composure. House Duplain was formally requesting that I serve as Lady Aileen's personal magic instructor. I accepted without hesitation and told him it was an honor. Denise heard every word. The butler turned to me after hearing everything and asked if I was prepared to leave with them immediately. I declined. I would consider the offer seriously, but only after completing my current training. He tried a different angle, better compensation. It did not work either. I apologized and explained my position plainly. At my current level, I would not be able to help Lady Eileen the way she deserved. Teaching magic while holding anything back was something I was not willing to do. The butler accepted this with grace. The moment Lady Eileen learned my location had been found, when she heard the head butler had gone out the previous evening without informing her, she expressed regret. She had wanted to go herself. She stood up, ordered preparations for departure, and requested the fastest soldiers available. Her maid raised a concern about the terrain being difficult and the journey rough. Welcoming her instructor was a duty she could not hand to someone else. That night, the camp was quiet. The fire burned low. Denise sat beside it. After a long silence, she said she was leaving in the morning. Bella agreed, then added something about how quickly she seemed to be giving up. Denise looked at her and asked whether Bella privately thought she was a fool. Bella denied it quickly. Denise looked down and admitted something, that her stubbornness had always gotten her what she wanted, until now. This time she felt no desire to keep pushing. Bella told her that I wasn't someone who responded to status or money, that I seemed to be after something else entirely. That apparently sent Denise back to the conversation with the butler. My refusal, the part where I said I wasn't capable enough yet to help Lady Eileen properly. She turned it over in her mind and, for the first time, recognized there had been no pride in it, just honesty. I was deep in the cave when she found me. The stones around me were still rising slowly, telekinetic energy spreading evenly through the space when I heard footsteps. I opened my eyes slightly. Denise stopped a few steps away and asked whether she could sit nearby. I had no objection. I looked at her for a moment and told her something seemed different. She assumed I meant the way she was speaking. I told her it was her eyes. She didn't have a response for that. A faint smile appeared instead, then apologized for being a nuisance. She said she was done pursuing the matter. I thanked her and told her I hope she found a good teacher. She looked at me like that was the strangest thing I could have said. Then she told me she disliked magic. To her, it was a world of politics and performance. Her efforts to recruit me had been about reputation. Mine was growing, and since I would likely end up at Lady Eileen eventually, she had decided to step aside. I asked why she hated it. She paused, said she had once liked it, then stopped herself and reconsidered. After a long silence, she said she had simply enjoyed being praised. She had never loved magic. As a child called a genius, she had studied relentlessly. Then one day, she asked herself why she was doing any of it and found she had no answer. So she stopped. Simple to say. I told her that anyone would eventually grow tired of praise alone. She seemed surprised I was actually listening.
I told her safe travels. She found that annoying. Then she said I was the kind of person she was jealous of, someone who never questioned the notion of hard work, who simply believed they would become a great mage and moved accordingly. I said nothing. She turned to leave and told me that if we met again, we should say hello. I didn't argue with that. By morning, Aisline and her guard had reached the cave. From a peak above, Denise watched them go, something quietly jealous in her expression. Then she turned and walked away. Later that day at the Volt Mansion, Denise could not believe it. Aisline had been rejected.
But reflecting on it, Denise said she understood my reasoning better now. It hadn't been a rejection. I simply wasn't willing to leave before I was finished. She had joked that at the rate I was going, I might spend the rest of my life in that cave and eventually resemble some legendary beast from the East.
Denise turned it over in her mind, quietly wondering if I thought I was the only one who knew magic. Then a maid reminded her that a guest had arrived to share a meal with her father. She asked who it was and made her way to the dining room. She greeted her father as she entered. Then she saw me, sitting beside him, eating, completely unbothered, as if nothing had happened. She stood there with absolutely nothing to say.